I remember being there in the cinema. We were watching the Barbie movie, me and my partner, and this trailer comes on for this movie, and I just can't believe that they're making this a movie, but it's the GameStop thing. It's the GameStop guys. About how they invested and they did, and it's the whole, they're making a fucking movie about a Reddit thing, like Wall Street bets. I was losing my mind. I was saying, who are these people? Why are they doing it? How could they possibly make a movie about this? It just seems like the worst thing of all time. And obviously, liberals are watching it and they're going, wow, this is such a good example of people using the system to win. And that's just so unbelievably cringe. Unbelievably cringe.
There has been a bunch of these movies lately. Like, there was the one about, like, the behind the scenes about, like, Air Jordans, you know, like, where they came from. But it's not a movie about, like, Michael Jordan. It's about, like, the guys in the office that, like,
and the BlackBerry movie or something, like, who made the BlackBerry. Like, who fucking cares?
I heard about there's the Tetris movie as well, which apparently is like an actual, like, real distortion of what happened, where it's like, you know, like, this whole story about it's like there's the guy that invented it, but then there's also, like, the savvy American businessman that brought it to the West or some shit like that. It's just like, is this a way that they kind of, like, relitigate these people are funding these movies to kind of, like, to reframe themselves as heroes or whatever, you know, or, like, it's the only way that they can see themselves as heroes. So, like, you know, like, they want it to be like Wolf of Wall Street or something, you know.
Well, there you have it. There's your intro. Everyone, a bit of stuff to get mad about. It's Red Planet. Welcome to the show. We're going to kick off in the same way we do every week. And I'm going to ask, dear sweet Kira, what's the most base thing you did over the last 2 weeks? Because it's been 2 weeks since our
my God. Show. Jeez. Honestly, it's going to sound super boring, but still struggling with depression. I think I might be somewhat over the hump, despite the things that are happening in the world right now, which sounds very counterintuitive. But I've been just struggling super hard. So that's kind of it. It's not very exciting, though.
What you're saying is you've been keeping going despite the horrors. You've been persisting.
That
right. Sounds pretty base. That sounds pretty fucking base to me.
Thanks. I know it's pretty boring if it happens over and over again. It's, you know, people want to hear more exciting, more base things, but, like, that's all I got, unfortunately.
Well, I disagree. I think that there's a lot of people out there who need to hear you say that. And I think that saying that is really based. And I think that, like, you know, a lot of people can think that, you know, it's real hard to go out there and do activism. Sometimes a lot of people can't do it. Like, a lot of people who listen to our show are going to be disabled in a way that they can't, like, leave the house. And I think that that's, you know, it's always the advice that I give people like that is that, like, you continuing to survive and persist in this world that actually doesn't work for you is based in and of itself, right? Because the system is not built for people with disabilities, mental disabilities, you know, mental health issues and stuff like that. So
thank you. That's really kind of you to say, Mule. And you know what? I want to know what base thing you've been up to.
Well, me, oh my gosh. It's been a whole week of me sort of, like, going on all cylinders, firing on all cylinders again with the union. I've been helping a bunch of people who've been giving me phone calls that I've had to sort of over the last few months with my sickness sort of say, I don't know if I have the time or energy to deal with that. But I've been getting back to a bunch of those people and speaking to them. And one person that I completely forgot to get back to surprised me on Wednesday morning, I think, with a phone call, a couple of phone calls. And I answered the phone, and it was someone that I'd spoken to a few months ago about getting a Section 21 order. For those of you who are not in the UK, Section 21 is a no-fault eviction. It's where the landlord just says, give me my house back for no reason. It's one of the worst laws that exists in the UK that benefit landlords. It's absolutely awful. It makes people homeless. It's responsible for about 75% of people who are like on the edge of becoming homeless. Like, that's 75% of the reason why they're like that in our country that has a homelessness epidemic. This family, they are migrants, and they've lived there for about 4 years. They have leave to remain. Both the parents are ill. One of them's on benefits, and the other one is basically getting an assessment. But I saw how she was moving when I was at the property, when I went to see them the day after, and she's quite clearly physically disabled, like with her legs and stuff. So it's quite obvious, and that's the kind of situation that they're in. The landlord is, unforgiving and unsympathetic to these kinds of things. So we did an emergency call out for an eviction resistance, which was happening the next day. And I just want to say that if there's anyone from GMT watching or listening to this, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of our union, because we managed to mobilize easily 10 people to turn up. This was a place in Moss Side, so it was pretty easy for most people to get to. So pretty happy that it was that kind of a scenario. But we had some people from a squat that we helped like a few weeks ago turn up. We had like a bunch of members turn up, some ex-committee members, and we had one person inside with the family talking to them, trying to basically like understand their situation a bit better, so that we have like a bit more of context to help them with. I'd already got in touch with someone that we work with at the Greater Manchester Law Centre to help them with their homelessness application, because they were, I don't know if this bit was sort of lost in the live, but basically they were wanting to move them like about an hour away to North Manchester, where, their kids are all at the point of, they've got 4 kids. They're all like 12 to 16, and they're all like that's like a crucial formative time for their education. So they just can't. It's not applicable for them to move that far away. And so Greater Manchester Law Centre are helping them with that. They're having a legal challenge to the homelessness decision, and hopefully we're going to send something over to the courts as well to defer the eviction decision. And we basically defended the people. We defended the tenants on Thursday. It was actually really easy, and I do just want to just tell you a little bit, because I was organizing it. It's the first eviction resistance I've ever organized. It really does count to be a bit like a military sort of in terms of like organizing and mobilizing. I know that sounds like a little bit cringe, but just hear me out. So because we only had about 9 or 10 people, and they were all like very young people, they weren't necessarily like massive strong people. Like, what I was thinking about was, well, if a bailiff wanted to break the law and try and get away with it and move someone, they could probably move one person quite easily. But if we got everybody to link arms together in like a sort of mini military formation, it's going to be a lot harder. So I said, all right, as soon as the bailiffs are coming, I'll tell you all to tighten up. Just get nice and tight and stand in front of the door. They can't touch you. That's assault. And we did that, and it was super effective. The bailiff basically didn't know what to do. Like, his face was a picture when he saw me. He was like, what's going on here then? And so then I had to talk with him and say to him, and I think this is a really good anecdote for our unofficial slogan, that we're not looking for people to debate, we're looking for people to act. Because this bailiff legit tried to debate me. He legit was trying to debate me on housing law, being like, well, you should have known that they could have gone to the courts this morning, and you should have known that this happened, and you said that their housing decision, and this, that, and the other, and all this stuff. And even though I was put on the spot and I didn't know a lot of this family's history, the great thing about it is that all I had to say to him, well, whatever the case, the fact remains that we're not leaving until you do. And that's all he could do. So, there it is, folks. When people act, things get done. People get saved. People have a lot more of a better time in terms of experiencing material conditions. So that was the most basic thing that I did this week. But over to Tim. Tim, what about you?
Thank you for that, Mule.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Comrade Mule. I don't know. I feel like I did do something that I feel like was pretty based this week, but I don't know if I'm ready to have that discussion on Red Planet yet, but I will at some point, I think. Maybe it's even an episode we could do, but yeah.
I'll put you in touch with our producer.
Yeah. I'll send Conrad an email about that one. But so we'll just put a pin in it for now. But yeah. That's kind of like a anticlimax. But We do, however, have some based viewer action in the notes this week from a couple people. We've got two here, so they can fill in for me this week. We've got based viewer Steph. A few weeks ago, Steph wrote in to tell us about a paid day off work to do charity, clearing space at an allotment for use by a gardening group for displaced Ukrainians in Edinburgh. This will involve clearing the ground, setting up raised beds, and a polytunnel. And what did they say? Getting paid to do gardening instead of process mortgage applications, which is a bullshit job anyway, is basically the dream. So a huge W for me. And so we've got some photos flicking through on screen now of the little garden that they got working on. So that's pretty cool.
I love that massive lavender bush or rosemary bush or whatever. I think it's lavender, but yeah, I'm loving that.
It's butterfly lavender, I believe.
Yeah. Ooh. So, and we've also got based viewer Friso, who says, this week I've attended a protest in support of Palestine, as well as reach out to a local Palestinian who I knew of but haven't talked much with, and will hopefully manage to go and have some tea with them this week and hopefully be able to lend some emotional support. That's great. Like the little things as well, like just reaching out to people in your community. Great. Very based. Nice one, Friso.
Oh yeah.
So we always want to hear about any kind of based things that you've been doing. If you have anything like Steph and Friso, you can shoot us a message on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name and pronouns if you want to include them. And we'll shout it out at the start of a later episode. Cool. So let's take a look at the news. Who wanted to go first?
Oh, that's going to be me. I want to talk about what's going on at CDPR or CD Projekt Red. So if you've ever played Witcher, if you've ever played Cyberpunk, these are two major games that have been released by the CD Projekt Red studio. Many people love Witcher. Many people hate Cyberpunk. Whatever your feelings are, you have to acknowledge that these are pretty major games. This particular studio also has this reputation of claiming that they are like a humanitarian kind of studio in which they would never crunch their employees. But turns out, and by the way, they got a lot of positive press from that. People saying, we're definitely going to buy your game. But then they turned around and in order to make deadlines, crunch their employees to create Cyberpunk. So generally speaking, this studio has some pretty scummy behavior towards its developers. And now, over the past, I believe, 3 months, they've done 3 rounds of layoffs. So that has led CDPR and others in the Polish gaming industry to unionize, which is pretty awesome because we rarely see this type of action in like tech. So it's really, really exciting to see this happen. Let's see here. The union explains on their website, we started talking about unionizing after the 2023 wave of layoffs when 9% of Reds, that is roughly 100 people, were let go. This event created a tremendous amount of stress and insecurity affecting our mental health and leading to the creation of this union in response. Having a union means having more security, transparency, better protection, and a stronger voice in times of crisis. In response, CD Projekt Red has stated, we have been informed about the intention to form a trade union covering game dev companies, including our company. We will act in accordance with law and comply with legal obligations that might arise from that situation. At the same time, it's worth mentioning that the voice of Red's team is already represented by the Red Team Representatives, which is a democratically elected body representing all employees and independent of the management board. We have been working with them for over 2 years now, and we will continue to do so to keep our work environment transparent, safe, and healthy. And I like to take this moment to point out that this is what many would regard as a yellow union, an organization that kind of like claims it's a union, tries to like use union-y words, maybe even get something done, maybe even accomplishes a similar goal as a union would. But at the end of the day, they work in concert with employers and they don't work in opposition with employers. And you can kind of see the results of that. 3 waves of layoffs, crunch that wasn't supposed to be crunched.
Wow,
and this is the result of your yellow. Yeah, what an effective union, right? So like, I'm just very, very excited for CD Projekt Red devs to be able to get this union representation. And also as a gamer, can I just take a moment? As a gamer, I just want everyone to acknowledge that I'm a gamer.
Can
capital
she say
G.
that? Can she say that?
I speak for all gamers right now, by the way. As a gamer who was severely disappointed by the Cyberpunk 2077 video game, not only because of the content, a lot of the content was a dud, but lots of the criticisms of that game was that it was like unfinished, that they put way more money in just getting Keanu Reeves to play in it versus actually paying the devs and letting the devs actually like create the game at the pace that they were meant to create this game. It resulted in a very lackluster product. So even if you're not all that concerned with worker rights, which I think you should be, because don't be a bad person, but also why are you watching this show if you're not into worker rights? But if in the event that you accidentally clicked on us, you should also support the CDPR staff unionizing, because it's going to create a better gaming experience for you.
Literally, like, can you imagine the embarrassment of someone asking you, like, okay, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a game developer. What games have you worked on? Oh, Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, because, you know, like in the popular culture, like contemporary media analysis, you know, everybody was talking about how it was so bad and it was a failure, and everyone is gonna immediately, because of that like sort of liberal brainwashing that we all go through, put it down to the devs rather than the company itself, right?
I remember there was even, this is a little bit off topic, but I remember the rhetoric surrounding that time when CDPR released the very, very buggy Cyberpunk, after a ton of hype, a ton of investment in Keanu Reeves and advertising the game, et cetera, and it turned out to be buggy. So many like Redditor types were running around the internet being like, if you speak ill of this game, you are harming developers. You're speaking ill. You are shaming developers, or you're insulting developers. Yeah. And it's like, if you really care about devs, then you should acknowledge that crunch is anti-dev, 1. And 2, you should also acknowledge that like any issues with your game is going to be the problem of the studio, basically the executives who are inflicting these like ridiculous deadlines on people and then not compensating their employees adequately for it.
Yeah, there was a thing that was going around, and I've seen it with other games as well, where they say, oh, if you don't support this game and if you don't go out and buy it, then all the programmers and the artists and stuff aren't going to get paid. And it's like, no, okay. That. So they're paid, they're paid for their time as it goes. They don't get like royalties for successful games. That goes all to like the studio heads.
They should, honestly. I think they should get royalties, but like that's a whole other thing.
There is a thing where I'm pretty sure they had it for Cyberpunk, but there's a lot of other games will have a thing where if it hits a certain review target, then they get like a bonus. So if it's like, okay, cool, like after the first 2 weeks, if all our reviews are like 9 out of 10 or above, then everyone gets a bonus. And it's kind of like, okay, I mean, that would be cool if it was a game that had been created, like if the workers had been taken care of when it was being made, and that, but like a lot of the criticism that people had for the development of like Cyberpunk in specific was just like the corporate culture kind of hampering the development. Like they would create something, and then someone would come along and they'd be like, no, we have to gut this entire system, we have to move to this new system, and we have to copy and paste this to here, and just ruining the work of the people that were really trying to build something the entire time. So it's like, if the game does poorly, it's got more to do with that kind of corporate structure and like the people that are kind of like the people that are more removed from the actual creating the game, but have like this huge say in how it goes or whatever. So it's kind of like how about the bosses don't get their bonuses if if the reviews you should pay the staff, like you should just pay them more anyway. Like they shouldn't have to be held up to this standard that has like their personal work probably has very little to do with like it, to do with the things that people were complaining about. Like no one was like looking at the game and being like, man, like these textures, like I'm looking at like, the textures on this cyborg and thinking like the guy that did these, like he did a shitty job and that's why I'm only going to give this a fucking 7 out of 10. It's like people look at it, they're like, this looks like it's mashed together, this looks like like it doesn't make sense, there's huge consistency problems and stuff. It's like, yeah, those are the things that people complain about, and those aren't the things that the workers get much say over, like
it also, for me, it also represents a disconnect from like the executives versus like the devs and actually the audience that the customer base, because so many gamers are like, I'm happy to wait another month, I'm happy to wait another 3 months. Like there's also always those handful of assholes that are like meh. But like generally
Nintendo
speaking,
fans, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Emil. But like generally speaking, like most people are like, I'm willing, if I'm gonna spend like $60 or $70 on a video game, I'll wait and also like buy a product that people put labor into. I'm okay waiting like 3 months more. Yeah. But it seems a very like, well, we set this deadline. That's a complete disconnect from reality when like the suits are like, we set a deadline, we gotta hit our numbers. It's just like, no. So very, very excited for the unionization happening at CDPR.
Yeah, I think it's like a huge positive move. And I love that it was started by CDPR people, but they, it's a Polish game workers union for the entire game workers, the games industry over there. So instead of just being like, hey, we're just going to do this for our people, they were like, they had a bigger vision. They were like, no, like across the entire industry. And I know that like in Poland, they are a huge chunk of that industry, but that kind of makes it cooler that they're like, there's other people out there that we can help. And yeah, so yeah, I think that's super cool that they've done that. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what they can get out of it.
Next, we have some American news. So I want to go to my American correspondent, Mule.
Hello.
Hi. Would you like to tell us what's going on at Kaiser Permanente, the one of the many monsters that has been created by the U.S. healthcare system?
I would love to. So this is huge news. Kaiser workers are out on the largest healthcare strike in U.S. history this week. More than 75,000 unionized workers at Kaiser Permanente walked off the job, the latest in a string of high-profile labor actions across the country. Of course, as Kara was sort of like talking about, the U.S. healthcare system is so bad, and Kaiser Permanente are like, it's just one sort of bullet point in a long list of things that are wrong with it. But essentially, there was a three-day strike against Kaiser Permanente on Wednesday to protest the non-profit hospital giant's alleged unfair labor practices, bad faith bargaining, inadequate wages, and chronic staff shortages that employees say are harming them and patients.
To be clear, this was last Wednesday, not this. It was like 2 Wednesdays ago because
2 Wednesdays ago. Yeah.
Okay. Anyways.
No worries. But yeah, the also I think it's important to sort of like look at this from a UK perspective as well, because we have a lot of striking doctors in the NHS at the minute as well, and they're all striking for the same reasons. And this is a result of the privatization of large swathes of the NHS. So there are lots of similarities between the things that workers at Kaiser Permanente are struggling with and what workers in the NHS are struggling with. So if you are for some reason listening to or watching our show thinking that the way to solve the problems in the NHS is to privatize it, first of all, what are you doing? How did you find us? Are you a cop? Secondly, no, this is proof that it is not the way to solve things. So, the coalition of Kaiser Permanente unions, which represents the 75,000 Kaiser workers who walked off the job Wednesday, said that picket lines were set up at hundreds of Kaiser hospitals and facilities in California, Colorado, Washington, and other states, as well as in Washington, D.C. The walkout was expected to be the largest healthcare worker strike in U.S. history. The coalition released a statement that said jobs affected by the strike include licensed vocational nurses, emergency department technicians, radiology technicians, ultrasound sonographers, teleservice representatives, respiratory therapists, x-ray technicians, optometrists, certified nursing assistants, dietary services, behavioral health workers, surgical technicians, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians, transporters, home health aides, phlebotomists, medical assistants, dental assistants, call center representatives, housekeepers, among hundreds of other positions. So we are talking just an absolutely massive walkout. And so, yeah, absolutely incredible moves. We will be hopefully reporting on some wins. They've been demanding $25 minimum wage for all Kaiser employees, 24.5% wage increase over the course of a new 4-year contract. And union negotiators have also called on Kaiser to hire at least 10,000 new workers by the end of the year to help alleviate staff shortages. The staff shortages that, at least according to healthcare workers in California, resulted in care being delayed or denied. So that's the situation with Kaiser Permanente unionized workers.
Can I just say that it's always really cool. I know this is like super basic, but it's always really cool to see people organize that aren't immediately like hammer and sickle standing people. I don't know. It's just really cool to, when you were describing like all the different types of employees that came together. I highly doubt these are all, like commie posters or anything. Right. These are like, if I could dare say, regular people.
No, they will be. I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really good point, because at the end of the day, it proves that revolutionary optimism is true, right? The material conditions under capitalism will get so much that people will be forced to do communist things. They will be forced to come together collectively and help each other. And, it's one in a long line of examples where people are coming together to collectively help each other when things are getting real shit. It's just a natural human sort of, you could say it's human nature. I'd be inclined to agree. Anyway, I'm sure everybody is aware of what's going on in Palestine recently, and we have a lot of stuff to update you about that if you haven't already heard most of it. I can't remember who said they wanted to do the next news story.
I think we said that we were all going to chip in.
We're all going to do it.
But I want to preface this by saying this upcoming segment is not even remotely going to be a comprehensive analysis of what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Next week, we will be doing that, though. We will be doing a comprehensive rundown of all of this. And I'm sure there will be other events that are going to unfold between now and then that we will also be covering. So right now, we're going to we're going to discuss some of it, but not even remotely all of it. So make sure you tune in next week if you want to have that part of that discussion.
Yeah. So the Kickstarter to this entire news segment was that Hamas, who are a reactionary force of basically Palestinians who, basically desperately want to just liberate Palestine, launched an attack killing 1,300 Israelis. Some of these people were settlers. Some of them were Israeli military. And as a result of that, Israel and America state intentions to wipe Gaza off the map. Now, obviously, the main thing to point out here, if our listeners or viewers don't know, is that Hamas is not all 2.2 million people in Gaza. Hamas are a group that basically organized in resistance to Israel back in 1988. I might be wrong about that. It might be 1998. It might be off by like a decade or something. And their constitution, their actual like sort of set down in stone thing is that they want to liberate the land that used to be Palestine, that is still Palestine, according to this co-host at least. They want to do that by getting rid of the Israeli government. the Israeli government, of course, because this is an active anti-colonialist statement, have said that this accounts to the genocide of every single Jew in the world. It's, of course, not true. There might be some people in Hamas who have said this at some point in time. But again, I think every single person here on this panel is going to say to you that, like, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. You are not being anti-Jewish if you criticize the actions of a massively white supremacist settler colonialist state. We have had guests on in the past that have said that Israel, even though they completely disagree with Israel, it's not white supremacist. It is overwhelmingly white supremacist in nature. It's overwhelmingly white European Jews who have citizen status in Israel. Even Palestinian Jews who, now live in Israel are treated as second-class citizens. Even Arabic Jews that the state of Israel and defenders of the state of Israel, claim to support and want to help liberate, are also treated as second-class citizens within Israel. But I should get back. Well, I mean, this is all the point of it, but like I should get back to the point of this particular news segment. So Senator Lindsey Graham, who you all probably know, he's an American, disgusting piece of shit, basically said, he basically urged Israel to level Gaza. And this is not just something that, Lindsey Graham is saying. There are just Democrats, Republicans, every single, ridiculous liberal, neoliberal government and country all over the world, like, are just basically calling for the extermination of Palestinians.
And there's been interviews on CNN now. They've had a couple of them with IDF soldiers who have said, these like terrible things, like saying, like, we're not just going for Hamas, like everyone is a target now, we have to exterminate everyone. And it's like, they don't even challenge them on it or anything, like the hosts don't say like, wait, so you're saying you're going to kill non-combatants, you're going to kill, it's just like, they just say it and they just go like, yeah, cool, sweet, like carry on. And it's like, it's wild to see these people are just like cheering on a genocide. And this isn't, this is like, like imagine just like any kind of media agency interviewing any other, like a soldier from any other conflict and hearing them talk about killing women and children and stuff and just allowing it to go unchallenged. And I mean, it's like, this obviously has a lot to do with the what they call the special relationship between America and Israel. There's so much going on there, and there's like this huge history of, I guess, like one hand washing the other there. But like when we say like, Israel is like complicit and, this kind of like white supremacist kind of the thing or whatever, it's, America is a huge part of that. And it goes both ways. They, like America and Israel are training each other's police that then, like American police train with Israeli special forces to come back to, places like Ferguson and oppress Black people. It's like there's this gigantic project there that is like not just like, we're seeing it with the Israel-Palestine stuff, but it's like so much bigger than that as well. But we'll get into that more in our deeper analysis at a later date.
I think a really important thing to say is that, we at Red Planet, we're here to give you the good news. And while there's not much good news to be found in this recent development, there have been massive, and when I say massive, we're talking over 100,000 people in London, UK, thousands of people in Manchester. I don't know the amounts of people in various different cities in America, but in Amman, in Jordan, in France, in tons of cities all over the world, there have been huge
down here
pro-Palestinian, in New Zealand, Ontario as well. There's huge pro-Palestinian support, and of course, the vile Prime Minister, the vile Home Office, Home Secretary Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak here in the UK have said that they want the police to consider waving a Palestinian flag as an act of terrorism. They want to say this is worthy for grounds of arrest. Of course,
a woman in France arrested for speaking Arabic, and the police. All she said was she basically greeted a neighbor. She was arrested, and the police. The police eventually let her go. I don't think she had any charges filed, but they said, we just can't be too careful at times like this. It's like, what are you talking about?
Well, what we're seeing, I think that's a great thing to mention, Tim, because what we're seeing is the vast amounts of Islamophobia that have been drilled into the imperial core public consciousness since 9/11 is now ultimately being exacted by the genocide of Palestinians. Like, this is an attempted genocide. They are trying to manufacture consent of the whole population of the world that this is fine. This is a fine thing to happen. But again, we're going to get into that as well. It's vile just to see all the American politicians, including Joe Biden, but again, tell me again how voting for Joe Biden is, or the Democrats is harm reduction. Yeah. Tell me again, how that is a good thing to do. And Israel have been pummeling Gaza with rockets and gave, basically Gazans, if you think about Gaza is like this 25-mile strip that is surrounded by sea. It's surrounded by a huge ring fence, and then also the border with Egypt. The border with Egypt, which has historically really been one of the only safe passing crossings for refugees, Palestinian refugees who've had enough. They want to leave. They want to get out. It's called the Rafah crossing. That is now closed. It's been closed by Egypt, by the way.
Oh, I should also add that not only is it closed by Egypt, but any sort of aid that Egypt is trying to provide to Gaza is now not able to continue because Israel keeps bombing that area. So the only small little patch of land in which you can get through, Egypt is upholding the blockade against people traversing that particular entry point, but also any aid being provided cannot be provided anymore because Israel is bombing anyone who's trying to provide aid.
Yes, and also alongside that, the Israeli Defense Force demanded that Gazans in the North Gaza area, so basically half, like the 12-mile sort of like northern end of Gaza, they've said every Palestinian in there needs to leave. That's 1 million people. 1 million people who, where they're going to go when they get to southern Gaza? There's barely, it's overcrowded in Gaza as it is. And, when they've tried to leave, well, the Israeli Air Force has bombed the fuck out of those refugees, So this is just not.
I feel like we should back up a bit because I think we're making assumptions of, I think everyone is probably watching. Most people probably understand the news, but just to be very clear, what's currently happening is because of Hamas's killing of 1,300 Israelis, Israel has decided to go full on genocide of Gazans. And not just exclusively Gazans, but any Palestinian, they're also committing these genocidal acts in the West Bank, but they're especially vowing to wipe out the Gaza Strip, which, by the way, is a densely packed open-air prison wherein extraordinarily disenfranchised Palestinians are trapped, and 50% of the people living in Gaza are children. 50% of the people living in Gaza are under the age of 18. So Israel has issued a you gotta leave. First, they started bombing. They dropped, I believe, 6,000 bombs prior to this announcement, for the record, in a small strip that Mule was describing. But not only that, they're now saying, or this was already maybe 24 hours ago, so time is probably up at this point. They issued a 24-hour warning for 1.1 million people in the north to evacuate to the south of Gaza, which, by the way, if you didn't know, Gaza is extraordinarily packed to the brim. That's one of the biggest criticisms of Gaza, is that it is an intensely dense, effectively concentration camp, if I could be so bold to say, of Palestinian people. So telling all those people, 1.1 million, that they need to pack it up and leave to somewhere else that they're unable, that is not there, would crash on couches, what 24-hour notice to do that, and to also let, just abandon all of your belongings, abandon your home, the few memories that you've been able to have, the few things you've been able to accumulate, you have to abandon. So every organization, including many charitable organizations that normally never take sides, are even speaking up and saying, this is wrong. This is a war crime. This is humanitarian crisis. This is any way, shape, or form that described it. Even parties that are normally neutral are coming out and saying this, because it straight up is. This is Nakba 2.0. You're insisting, you're doing a forced displacement of a massive amount of Palestinians, and saying, if you're not leaving, we will slaughter you.
Yeah,
and we all know that Israel's 24-hour notice is nothing but them trying to play the good guy ever so slightly before they do what they want to do, which is genocide a massive amount of Palestinians, including children.
Well, they've talked about it quite a bit in the past. The warnings they're not so much, or they're definitely not perceived so much as like a warning. They say like, hey, we gave you advance notice, so you guys leave. But apparently that's not how it comes at all. It comes through basically as a phone call saying that you're going to get bombed, and it's more of a threat than a thing. They've
also done like roof knocks and things like that, where they drop a bomb before they drop more bombs to like knock, essentially. So that's very
it's a thing as well, where it's like, it also makes people terrified of answering any phones or anything like that. There's people will intentionally get their phones disconnected, because then they know if the call still comes through, that's the IDF saying the bomb's coming, because that's the only call that can come through a disconnected line over there. So
oh my gosh, that's terrifying.
So which means that they have to cut themselves off from, and this is like, in a place where they're also cutting off the power and internet and stuff. A traditional kind of like phone line was the only way that you could actually get information in and out, because that's obviously, you don't, like with an old phone, you don't need power or anything. All you need is a phone line to get it. So so it's like this like terrible thing where it's like, okay, you have to choose, like, do you want to know if this is going to be a bombing call, or do you want to be able to actually communicate with everyone outside and what's going on.
I should also say that in addition to what we've mentioned, Israel has also cut off all water, food, medical aid, electricity completely to Gaza. So if that wasn't bad enough.
And there's already been an existing blockade for a long time. Like the Israeli-Egyptian blockade that I think has been going for like a better chunk of the 2000s so far, which is like there's always been like defense and all this kind of stuff, but they've been blockading like cement and things like that, like building materials, so that people can't fix things, people can't build new infrastructure, anything like that. Even just like any kind of like plumbing equipment, anything like that. That's why they say like turning on, like Israel have just announced that they're turning the water back on or whatever like that. They're like, it doesn't matter. Like, this makes no difference to us, because most Palestinian people were having to go to fill up jugs of water for their houses even before the bombing started. It's like, it's like a lot of the stuff is, I think it's token stuff. It looks good on paper. It goes, look.
Hey, speaking of token stuff, they've even dropped flyers. Isn't that nice of them?
Things like that. Like, it's
sounds familiar. Does anyone kind of dropping flyers on a civilian population before you bomb them?
When we see stuff like this, like the IDF, and they're telling us like, this is what we do. We do the warnings, we do the drops, we turn the water back on and stuff. You have to look at it in the context of like what is already happening there, and it's usually it's not so simple. So
just being conscious of the amount of time that we have, I want to run through real quick the stuff that's going on in the West Bank as well. So, you know, we've spoken about Gaza, we've spoken about Hamas coming out of Gaza and attacking, you know, Israeli settlers and stuff like that. But here's the thing, you know, this is how you know that it's just genocide based, as Kira has mentioned, like previously, like literally, like they're just attacking Palestinians in the West Bank as well. An illegal Israeli settler was filmed shooting a Palestinian at point blank range in the city of Hebron in the southern West Bank. That was a report by Anadolu Agency. Video circulated by Israeli non-governmental organization B'Tselem, who are a pro-Palestinian sort of like, I think, liberation organization, showed an armed settler assaulting Palestinians in the village of Al Tawani near Yatta, south of Hebron, before opening fire at one of them at point blank range in the presence of the Israeli army. In a statement, the Palestinian Health Ministry said the critical injury resulted from the ammunition fired by the occupation forces impacting the abdomen. The wounded individual was transported to Shahid Abu al-Hassan al-Qasim Hospital in Yatta. So not really, you know, saying this is a terrible thing that happened and it shouldn't have happened. Just like, yes, they've been shot and now they're in hospital. Great, thanks, good. In general, the Israeli army and settler attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank have increased dramatically since last Saturday, with 55 Palestinians killed and more than 1,100 others wounded. Palestinians in Israel suspended from jobs over conflict. Palestinians who are living in Israel have been suspended from their jobs over the conflict. Which is, again, more evidence that, you know, Palestinian Jews, Palestinians living in Israel who decided to, like, you know, just try and adapt and you know, live in the settler colonial world that Israel's created for them, they're still living as second-class citizens. So, you know, if Israel's only concerned about suppressing Hamas and not Palestinians in general, this is proof that the wider population, it doesn't really read it like that. According to human rights activist Samir Abu Shams, the Israeli army is in violation of multiple international laws, particularly the Geneva Conventions, which stress that civilians should be unharmed in situations of war and armed conflict. In another instance, on Friday, 13th of October, Karim Al-Jalad was driving home from Tulkarm's vegetable market to his home in the southern district of the city at about 8:20 p.m. He was on the street near the Jewish settlement of Gishuri, which connects the west of Tulkarm to its south. Israeli soldiers fired at his car. And Al-Jalad, thinking it was, sound bombs, basically just kept driving, but he was hit 3 times by live ammunition in the chest, in the hand, and the shoulder. There were 5 bullets on the front of Karim's car. His cousin Ala Al-Jalad said to Al Jazeera, Karim kept driving on the road until he reached the Al Safir roundabout. From there, he was transferred by ambulance to the local hospital. So that's just some of the atrocities that have been going on in the West Bank, just as a result of this. Again, you know, the reason that we say this, the reason that we're trying to like put some clarification out there for people who may be listening to our show, who may be like worried, like, oh my God, I absolutely need to, make sure I'm saying the right thing about Israel. I need to make sure I'm saying the right thing about what's happened and stuff like that. I think it's a good thing to remember that, like, while the focus is on Gaza at the minute, Israeli settlers, the Israeli Defense Force, are still killing people in the West Bank, which is hundreds, thousands of miles away from Gaza. It's nowhere near it. Hamas doesn't even operate there. And also, another thing to remember is that this is an active occupation. I think all of my co-hosts can agree here that, you know, while it's terrible that Israeli, civilians have died, they are not technically civilians. They are people who've been lied to by the Israeli government. The Israeli government has lied and said that it is safe to come live here. It is your right. No, it is your destiny to come and live on this stolen land that is not yours. And they have made them cannon fodder. That, like, they do not care about the lives of the settlers near Gaza who died, because they were put there for that reason. They were put there so that if Hamas does attack, they have a reason to go to war with them. That's literally the modus operandi on this shit. So, you know, it's awful, but if you're feeling sorry for these people who've died, you should be feeling sorry because they were tricked. They were literally tricked. They were lied to.
They, like the US and Israel kind of propaganda machine is like just immense, and you can see that in the reactions to Israeli, like white Israeli Jews on the other side of the world, having breakdowns, thinking that there's going to be a national day of jihad and that Palestinians are going to come kill them in their homes and all these kind of things, or like, people freaking out about their Palestinian Uber driver. It's all like, this is so deranged,
Are
this
you
is like
serious?
these are like real, like this is a real brainworms, and this is a part of this propaganda project that they are kind of, that they have been exposed to, where it's like they think that they are under attack by the people that they are like brutally subjugating, and like Eve Barlow and Barry Weiss and all those people that are like kind of pushing these lines and stuff. They have nothing on the line whatsoever. Like they will never be meaningfully affected by this conflict, But yeah, and also going in with what Mule was saying about how these people were put on the front lines, like these settlers that people put out into the kibbutz to kind of like, like settle these areas and stuff. They are, these are the people that have been taken hostage as well. And the IDF has been releasing, like these notes and statements saying that rescuing hostages is just like not a priority for them, like,
yeah, they've already bombed Gaza where the hostages are being kept and killed their own Israeli people.
Like that's what it means to them, it's like these people are like secondary, they're citizens, their own people that they say that they're trying to protect and all this kind of stuff. They're secondary to the expansion of Israel and the destruction of Palestine and the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. So yeah, I think that really kind of shows you where their priorities are. I mean, they're telling us where their priorities are, like I think it's pretty obvious. So yeah, it's the other thing to know is that Israel has mandatory conscription. So whereas if you see, like an 18-year-old Palestinian kid, like who IDF classifies every 18-year-old person and over as a military combatant. In Israel, these people are actually trained with weapons. They have a service weapon that they take home with them. A lot of them, there's periods where they're told they have to keep their weapon on them, even if they are just like chilling, like, so you see a lot of photos of, settlers and they'll just be chilling wearing casual clothes, but they'll have like a rifle and things like that. Whereas like these people are military trained. They, they have all that kind of stuff. And they are part of like this like kind of, this like they're just as much a part of the occupation as like a general that has been in the army for like 50 years or whatever like that. They are like soldiers and they're on the front line. So I think there's like a lot of stuff where they unfairly malign young Palestinians as as like soldiers or warriors, like I saw like people being called Hamas warriors and shit. And it's like, no, these are just children. Whereas I think it's fair to say if there is a young person in Israel, they've done the military conscription and stuff. Like if you're taking part in this, like you're a soldier, you went, you put on the uniform, you have the gun, all that kind of stuff. Like you're part of this, regardless.
I should also add that, I've read that the White House is going to send, or has maybe already sent, like I think like 20,000 rifles to Israeli settlers to arm themselves against Palestinian people. Not only that, but the National Security, or Minister of National Security of Israel, Ben-Gvir, is also distributing 10,000 rifles to Israeli settlers, and many of them who are illegally settled in the West Bank. So yeah, this stark distinction that people are trying to make about military versus civilian. I mean, I have a whole thing about that. I think we're out of time. Like we're really over time.
Yeah, we need to.
Next week we will be talking about this in depth. So make sure you join us next week when we talk about and we'll have more to discuss, I'm sure, as unfortunately these events unfold even further. To make sure you tune in next week.
Okay, real quick, just before we jump into our guest section, comrades of the show, Palestine action, not in the UK, but in the US. very interestingly, have blockaded the entrance to Cambridge, Massachusetts Elbit factory, which is owned by Israel's largest weapons firm. They sprayed paint and blood red paint spilled across the front to symbolize the Palestinian bloodshed. A spokesperson said, "We will target any Israeli company and weapons factory complicit in the ongoing massacre of the Palestinian people across the world. Palestine, we are with you." And the Palestine Action UK have actually released a website detailing 50 sites of like companies and organizations that are complicit in the genocide of Palestinians. So weapons manufacturers, agencies that hire staff to work in these factories, security firms, all this kind of stuff. They've released that, and what kind of actions could be done against them in a safe and legal manner. Of course, we would never tell you to do anything that was illegal here on Red Planet. But solidarity and love to our comrades at Palestine Action and with all the Palestinian people. But before we go on any further, don't forget, folks, we have a Patreon. Oh my gosh, you can give us money. We're doing really, really well on the Patreon at the moment. I want to say, I think we're at like $900 or something like that.
Around there, yeah.
So we're so close to being able to afford an editor, gang. So if you've been waiting to be the heroes, that take us that little bridge further on to get us to that goal, so that we can hire an editor, so that you can get more Red Planet content, so that we can get more eyes on our show, now's the time to do so. Please go to patreon.com/red_planet. Help us get an editor. You can subscribe from as little as $2, £2 a month, $3 New Zealand dollars 50. So yeah, make sure you get over and do that. So it's time for us to get into our main segment. So we at Red Planet are always saying how the revolution will come from outside of the imperial core, in the periphery, the colonized, struggling countries where wealth extraction from capitalists and neocolonialism have devastated the land and the people. But some things we rarely touch on are the revolutionaries of the past: Burkina Faso, Cuba, Vietnam. But this week, specifically, we're going to be talking about Ethiopia with returning guest, the one and only Anansi from Anansi's Library. How are you doing, Anansi? Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how's everyone doing?
Doing good. Yeah. Well, like all things considered, yeah.
The horrors persist, but
How are you?
As good as y'all are doing.
So we've had Anansi on the show before. They came on to talk to us. God, it was like almost 2 years ago, I think. What were you talking with us about? I can't even remember.
We were talking about like protests and riots.
Protest and riot tactics. And we how to spot like undercover cops and things like that.
Yes. But just to people who don't know you or aren't familiar with that particular episode, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Anansi. I run the channel appropriately named Anansi's Library, where I talk about whatever I end up feeling about talking about, but I generally will talk about books, like radical theory, things like that. My most recent video was on anarcho-nihilism, just kind of explaining that topic. And one of my most recent massive projects has been my video on the Ethiopian Revolution, which I think I was working for that like almost a year and a half, just like researching and reading a lot of different books and writing it. But yeah, that's generally what my channel is all about. Talking about whatever I find interesting or important.
And it's an incredible video. It's about 2 hours long, 2.5 hours long, with lots and lots of highly detailed information in there. Again, as I said in the intro, this is a bit of a blind spot for us on Red Planet. So do you want to talk to us a little bit just about like, I guess, a brief modern history of Ethiopia?
So yeah, this is a very, very dense topic. When I started researching it, I wasn't intending it for it to be such a massive project. As I got deeper and deeper and deeper, the well did not meet an end, and I just kept getting more and more information. So like a brief modern history, people are probably familiar with the war that took place recently in Ethiopia that started in 2020. It actually ended last year, back in November, if I remember correctly, or around that time. It ended last year. But the entire Tigray genocide was a very, very big topic that people were talking about. And essentially, the Ethiopia right now, like in its modern context, is in a very interesting position. So basically, the revolution kind of quote unquote ends in like 1991, and the government that takes place after that, which is controlled by the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, but is a coalition party including a lot of different organizations. The coalition is basically the EPRDF is the acronym. Another thing with studying the Ethiopian revolution, there are a lot of acronyms that at times sound very similar or are the same, and it can get a little confusing. My cat is on my desk right now, just demanding.
Incredible content.
But yeah, so the EPRDF takes over Ethiopia in 1991. Basically, the Derg collapses after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that's right now that party is no longer in power, because essentially in 2016 Abiy Ahmed, when he became the new prime minister of Ethiopia, he kind of reorganized the political structure there so that the EPRDF was no longer the ruling coalition party. He created a new coalition party to kind of reorganize the balance of power in Ethiopia, which was one of the reasons that the war with the TPLF started. There was a couple of reasons. It was a mess of a situation, but yeah, that's kind of a brief modern context to like breakdown of what's going on. Like now the Ethiopian government is like, joining the BRICS program with China and trying to kind of grow economically, and yeah.
Gotcha. And in terms of like the revolution that you specifically talk about in the video, it's like I don't want to get this wrong because I haven't watched the video yet, but like it seems to be that you sort of like start off with the revolution that began from basically rebelling against the Haile Selassie empire, right? Which is like the emperor was in place, or like the empire itself was in place for like hundreds of years. And so in terms of that, is that kind of like where the revolutionary attitude in Ethiopia began?
It's that's where it kind of is the upswell in 1974 when Haile Selassie is deposed, but the revolutionary like attitude and spirit starts building pretty long before then. So most people are going to say the Ethiopian Revolution starts in 1974, and I feel like that's kind of a cop-out answer, because Eritrea. Okay, so Eritrea is a country, or at the time was a region to the north of Ethiopia that was controlled by the Haile Selassie regime. Basically, the Italians invaded Eritrea in the 40s and took it over when they were colonizing Ethiopia. And after the fall of Italian fascism in the late 40s, the British basically not just the British, it was basically this thing called the Four Powers Commission, which was the USSR, the United States, England, and I think France. The four of them basically were kind of redrawing some of the lines on the Ethiopian map now that it had been taken back from the Italians, and they basically worked with the Ethiopian government and Haile Selassie to make Eritrea a federation of Ethiopia. So stop brushing my mic, Cedric. Sorry, this cat. But so basically, the intention was that Eritrea would be like a federation of Ethiopia, so they would be technically part of Ethiopia, but still have like local autonomy. But Haile Selassie's regime, basically, as soon as he takes power in Ethiopia, works over the next decade or so to just slowly degrade that autonomy, and it gets to the point where in 1962, Eritreans start the ELF, the Eritrean Liberation Front, and that is kind of, in my opinion, where the revolution begins, especially because it has. At this point, the Ethiopian student movement is starting to rise up, and this is going to be where most of the revolutionary fervor in Ethiopia comes from. And that particular moment when the Eritrean struggle kicks off is a huge radicalizing and like a dividing moment for the Ethiopian student movement. It kind of kicks a lot of into more radical action, because there are a lot of Eritrean students who are in Ethiopia at this time, like, and some of them are leaving to go join the Eritrean struggle. Some of them are being repressed by the Haile Selassie regime, and some of them are like literally getting into arguments and sometimes fist fights on campuses over, this the Eritrean struggle. It's a very intense situation. So that kind of causes a lot of the Ethiopian student movement to become more radicalized, and also is the beginning of some of the divisions in it, because they're not all unified on what they're calling the Eritrean question, which is really just the question of do Eritreans deserve to be free or not? It right. Like is a very simple answer. It's yes. Yeah. So the revolutionary attitudes really start taking a lot of build up in 1962, but the revolution proper in Ethiopia at least starts in 1974.
Okay. Cool. And so you've sort of touched on a little bit about like what happened in terms of like the I guess the meddling by the imperial powers. First it was Italy, and then the Four Powers Commission, like you say. But I guess like I think a thing that we try and focus on a lot in Red Planet is materialism. Now, obviously, you've spoke to us about the materialism of the Eritrean people, their liberation they were concerned with, and that kind of stuff. But what about, because you're talking about the student uprising, and maybe you want to, like, I don't know, talk about these two things separately. It's entirely up to you. But like, what were generally the material conditions like in Ethiopia at the time of the revolution?
Yeah, so this was one of the like interesting and like central questions of the Ethiopian student movement at the time, is them trying to kind of define what the material conditions of Ethiopia were. And people sometimes over exaggerate this connection, but it is generally there. But the Ethiopian position before the Ethiopian revolution is very similar to Russia before their revolution, where Ethiopia is kind of in this place where they're trying to modernize, and they're starting to become a more modern capitalist power, but there's still very heavily elements of feudalism that prop up their economy. Like that, I think at the point that the Ethiopian revolution was starting to become a thing, something like 70-something% of the Ethiopian population were still like peasants working on like straight up feudal land tenure systems and stuff like that. So there, like, even the Ethiopian labor movement at the time, there wasn't very much of one, because they just hadn't built up the industrial capacity where a larger labor movement became a thing. Like that wasn't really until the 70s where there was much of a labor movement, and like onward. So yeah, that's kind of the material conditions at that point.
And so I guess like the students were the people who were doing like a lot of the analysis of that, in terms of like, them actually like, wanting to figure out like, is this fair? Is this right? And like you say, like the question of the Eritrean people's liberation was a huge, like very incendiary as well, topic. So was it essentially the struggle of the Eritreans that like led to the rise of the student movement, or was it other things as well amongst the the issues of the time?
Yeah, there were other things before then. So the essential question that gets students to start asking more radical questions and start getting radicalized is a question of poverty in Ethiopia, and of like this feudal system. So when the student movement begins, it really begins, and students start having like mass protests and stuff like that. One of the major slogans that they come up with is "land to the tiller," which is basically, yeah, it's very self-explanatory. They're advocating for like massive land reform to give the people living under this feudal system a more fair deal and more fair kind of existence.
So that's incredible, because land reform is just like a massive element of what needs to happen everywhere, right?
A lot of revolutions and like anti-colonial struggles have all kind of like, I mean, it's like, Fanon like mentioned it over and over again about like being like the land being crucial and stuff. It's like, yeah, I think that's like something that I think that's like one of the things that can be like the bridge between the more liberal kind of thinking, where people are like, we can do okay in this system, and then becoming radicalized. Usually it's over like, like land stuff. When it gets to the point where it's like, that land reform is necessary, then it kind of comes, I think, yeah, that's the point when liberals are kind of just like, oh shit, okay, no, we do need to do the thing. Like,
Yeah, it's like super annoying when you like, I don't know, people are desperately attached to this idea that, you know, you can just own a thing and you can own a house. You know, whenever you talk to, like, you know, liberal white people who are like sort of center left, they'll say things like, "Oh, I can't wait to buy a piece of land and farm on it, and then I can escape this horrible world." And it's like, dude, you're like engaging in this individualism. But yeah, no, and again, it's like, you know, this is why like Marx was really impassioned about the enclosure of the commons, right? Because it is just like such a huge deal when it comes to like people's autonomy, people's agency in terms of like working class survival and stuff. Okay, that's super interesting, Anansi. And so yeah, I guess like seeing that the peasant farmers were, you know, just having such a shit time and that like landlords were fucking them over. I was doing a tiny bit of research just before the show, and it was like, it had like some crazy numbers, like 75% of you know, all land was like agricultural land and stuff. Oh no, hang on, sorry, I'm getting the numbers wrong. Landless peasants lost as much as 75% of their produce to landlords, which is like, yeah, absolutely incredible. Like I'm just on the Wikipedia here.
No, yeah, people lived in really bad conditions because of this feudalism, and like any attempt people made to improve these conditions or to kind of alleviate these issues, like even Haile Selassie's own attempts at like some form of land reform that wasn't really going to do much, like it wasn't really to help anyone anyway, but like even his small attempts at land reform and like increasing taxes on landowners were met with just like extreme vitriol from the Ethiopian bourgeoisie. Like like at the slightest provocation that someone was going to take even a measure of grain from them, they would just lose it. They would lose it. So this was a very contentious issue for the Ethiopian student movement, and part of what galvanized the students to protest on this issue was just the complete political stagnation around it. Like just the Senate was completely unable to come to any agreements on what should be done, and you know, the Ethiopian bourgeoisie they're the only representation of Ethiopian politics at this time, so no one has any interest in actually pushing this issue along to get done, which is why in 1964 the students get so fed up with it that they decide to protest and take the issue, you know, directly to the emperor. Like they're literally showing up to the emperor's palace, knocking on the door, like, y'all need to do something about this now. And the reaction from the Ethiopian state and the Ethiopian bourgeoisie is just immediately, so like the police, you know, show up and do what police do to break up this protest and are attacking and beating people. But also like the government is basically leaning on the faculty of the schools to punish the students for engaging in this activism, and students are being dismissed from courses, or you know, being dismissed from classes. There's like student amenities like cafeterias and stuff are being closed down, so students can't eat, and there are a lot of students who rely on these different resources from the school to get by, rely on, you know, being able to live on campus and stuff, and they're intentionally being screwed over. You know, the cruelty is the point of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen the similar situations happen in a bunch of different kind of revolutionary struggles around the world, where they because they kind of pick universities as being these, like, you know, like the radical breeding grounds or whatever, which is kind of funny because it's like, okay, yeah, cool, you build the universities, you introduce like the social sciences, and you teach people a bunch of those things, and all of a sudden they start going like, hey, wait, actually we can, you know, like we can change things, you know.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
From the jump there, Ethiopian state is like Haile Selassie, from the jump that they're creating these colleges, is very aware that student agitation is like a thing that could and probably will become a problem. So like the first person becomes the dean of students, like Haile Selassie literally tells him like to keep the students out of trouble, like make sure they're not doing anything. The first time that there's like even a whiff of issues, basically during there's this thing in 1962 called the College Day celebration, where, you know, they have like sports and different kind of games and stuff like that, and they have like poetry competitions and stuff. And during the poetry competition, one of the students And Haile Selassie is there personally at these events. One of the students reads a poem that he's written that basically discusses poverty in Ethiopia, and is asking asking the question of like, what do Ethiopian people deserve? Like, how are these people being treated? And Haile Selassie is so pissed about this that he never comes back. He never comes back. He literally he never comes back. And the next year, it's even worse. Like, even more students are writing about this subject and are just starting to ask these very important questions. So basically, the moment that students start asking these questions, everyone starts wanting to ask these questions, and the Ethiopian government is. They're so like Haile Selassie doesn't even want to show his face on campus anymore.
Incredible. Now, you'll have to forgive me because obviously, like, the reason we've got you on to speak about this is because you've done a 2-hour video about this, and you're intensely educated on this particular topic. But all I really have in terms of, like, within reach at the moment is the Wikipedia page, and it's definitely not looking like there's 2 hours worth of material on the Wikipedia page. In fact, it's pretty fucking short. It seems to say that, like, the Ethiopian revolution was because some military rulers of the Ethiopian army, comprised of, like, various different ideological I guess viewpoints, they actually united to create socialist reforms, which, like, doesn't make a lot of sense, but I wonder if you could expand upon that a little bit or debunk it.
Yeah, so this is the Wikipedia page definitely does not do this the justice at all, because it's a very complicated situation. But essentially, there's in 1974 there's like a large amount of famine in Ethiopia that's affecting people, and then on top of that, there are several student organizers that are killed by the police at this time, and there are prison revolts going on. So like the conditions of the revolutionary upswell in Ethiopia basically become so intense that the government is having a hard time maintaining control, and is realizing that, like, we're going to have to make concessions if any of us are going to stay in power. So it basically starts with the military coming together and kind of forming their own internal government, and then using their like military power, military force to depose. Like they arrest a lot of like politicians and stuff like that. Like, it basically, in order to kind of calm things down before it gets completely out of control, Haile Selassie tries to issue some reforms, and he removes one of the prime ministers and replaces him with someone who's like more liberal, trying to kind of assuage all of these different problems that are going on. But it doesn't really work, and the military ends up taking over, and they depose him. So basically, this military, trying to think of what the word for it is, like the acronym uses PMAC, a Provisional Military Administrative Council, but the word that they use in Amharic is the dirge. And basically the dirge's military council, they kind of, when they take over, they're kind of a blank slate in terms of politics. There are some of them who are radicalized in a left way, some of them who are just typical right-wing nationalists, some who are like liberal in the middle, but there's not really much political cohesion there. And okay, this is such a long story. It's very complicated. Student politics become very important during the Ethiopian Revolution, because basically, during the student movement, one of the student leaders who's very important is the student named Sine Liki. And but at a certain point, basically after the Eritrean Revolution starts and they're struggling for independence, this thing that they're calling the national question becomes really important to student politics and Ethiopian politics. People are basically asking the question, like, what does the term nation mean? What does nationality mean? Like, what do the different nations of Ethiopia deserve? How are we supposed to relate to each other and stuff like that, right? So the question kind of becomes this split in the student movement between people who are saying we want an Ethiopian state that has levels of local autonomy for these people, but they're still part of the Ethiopian state. We're still one, unified country. And there's people who are basically going, well, no, these people have the right to secession. They have the right to be their own nations, right? And this line, the difference between them on a policy wise is really minuscule, because ultimately, like, none of the parties who end up ruling really push for this actual answer to the national question, which is part of the reason we have some of the problems we have now in Ethiopia. But this split on this question becomes a really, really big factor of the Ethiopian student movement. And Sine Liki, he ends up on the more Ethiopian like unification side of it, and he kind of is ousted by the student movement. It's kind of funny because all of these different factions within the student movement are rivals to each other, but they kind of come together to oust Sine Liki out of Ethiopian student politics because they just fucking hate him. He just sucks. But once he's kind of ousted from Ethiopian politics, and then this revolution happens and the military takes over, he realizes, oh, if I go talk to these people first, I have another way into Ethiopian politics. So that's what he does. So he is the first person from the student movement to basically walk into the Derge's offices and be like, look, you guys need politics. I have politics. Let's have a conversation. He's a Marxist-Leninist at this point. So he starts becoming one of the main political advisors to the Derge. And that's kind of where some of their more socialist elements are coming from. And one of the people who basically there are two student organizations forming within the Ethiopian student movement that are going to become a major part of Ethiopian politics later. So like Sine Liki has his own faction off in the corner, we're talking to the military, called the Proletarian League. But within the student movement, there's MySong, which is the All Ethiopian Socialist Movement, and there's the EPRP, the Ethiopian People's Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, right? So these are the two factions, and basically there's like a very intense rivalry between these two factions, and most specifically between two of their leading members. So the All Ethiopian Socialist Movement, one of their leading members is this dude named Haile Fida, and the EPRP, one of their leading members is this dude named Berhane Meskel-Reda. These two dudes hate each other. They can't stand each other. They're seen like arguing, screaming at each other on campus all the time. They do not like each other, but they work together to oust Sine Liki from Ethiopian politics. And then after that happens and the revolution takes place and stuff, their two organizations are basically trying to get in talks to join back up and unify the student movement and work together again. But Haile Fida, seeing that Sine Liki has gained political power by just talking to the Derge, is like, well, I don't really need to unify with you, actually. So he basically goes to Sine Liki, the dude that he just screwed out of politics entirely. He comes crawling back to this man, talking about some trying to get his ear in with the military dictatorship as well. So they start working together, and MySong basically cuts off its talks with the EPRP to join up with them. And Berhane Meskel-Reda is forced to go into hiding because the EPRP's activities become illegal. And I feel like the important thing to point out with all this is that all of these different factions are Marxist-Leninist, at least in name. They're all using a lot of the same terminology and stuff, and to the point where sometimes their writings, the differences between them are so semantic that it's like two word differences that people are.
And nothing changes.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But yeah, that's kind of where the socialist elements of the Derge start coming from. And later on in the revolution, basically Sine Liki and Haile Fida start orbiting kind of around this dude named Mengistu Haile Mariam, who becomes one of the main leaders of the Derge. And as he progressively makes more and more power grabs to make himself the sole leader of the Derge, they're kind of hovering around him, providing him with political counsel and like helping him to rise to power within this structure. But then once he is in power, and then he basically starts talking with the Soviet Union and gets Soviet back, and he ends up purging MySong and the Proletarian League from the Derge, and like he declares them like enemies to the revolution and has them killed, which is it's very frustrating. The sad irony of this is that Haile Fida actually he builds all of these political structures for the Derge and then ends up dying in a Derge prison next to Berhane Meskel-Reda, the dude who he's been fighting this whole time and who's like his most bitter rival. They end up dying on the same day in the same jail after almost a decade of the two of them basically organizing armies of young Ethiopians to fight and die over their beat.
Yeah, that's fucked. That's real fucked. But I guess the upshot is that now, well, not now, but at this point in time, the Derge has enacted some of these socialist policies that are like, was there any actual land reform that went on?
Yeah. This is where like the conversation gets so complicated, because like there were genuine socialist elements within the dirge. I hate that these words rhyme, because it's so thematically off. They were purged by the dirge later on toward the end of the revolution. But yeah, there were the genuine socialist elements in the dirge, and they did a lot of work to initiate policy reforms and things like that. I think the thing that they're kind of the most well known for, in terms of their positive outputs, is the Zamecha, which is it's called an educational development campaign, but that's kind of inaccurate. It's more of a public development campaign. Like they're sending people out to go and work in schools and provide education and stuff to people, but they're also doing things like building bridges. They're vaccinating people and things like that. So at this point, there are 1.2 million people are vaccinated against diseases like smallpox, malaria, and tuberculosis. They plant 2 million trees across Ethiopia. They provide 1 million people with basic health education and stuff like that. They build almost 300 clinics across Ethiopia. So they do a lot of different things. And then one of the other big things they do is have this literacy program where they're basically, at this point, the vast majority of the population of Ethiopia can't read. So it becomes one of the priorities of the socialist elements within the dirge is expanding literacy to other people. So they're not even just going out and teaching people to read in one particular language. This program spans 15 different languages across Ethiopia, to the point that some of the languages that they're starting to teach people to read in, they don't actually really have developed written forms for them yet. So part of this process is them literally developing the written form of some of these languages. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting. And this is all part of the educational campaign, this whole public campaign.
Yeah, this is absolutely incredible, because just learning about how revolutions, no matter how messy and complicated they are, will a lot of the time have a very sort of similar outcome, some similar stuff. Because the thing that you're saying about Ethiopians learning to read and stuff, that's very similar to what happened in Cuba. And I think you mentioned in your video, I just know from you, mentioning in the description, that Fidel Castro and Che Guevara were they sort of I don't know, spoke to some people in Ethiopia or something.
Yeah,
I don't know. Is that a thing that went down?
That's a complicated situation. So basically, I made a mistake in the video that I meant to edit out, but I was editing at 3 a.m. and I was tired. But Che Guevara wasn't in Ethiopia at this point in history. He had died, but this is basically during the war between Ethiopia and Somalia over the Ogaden region, which was it was a whole thing. It kind of became part of Cold War politics, and there was some soft U.S. backing of Somalia, and the USSR is backing Ethiopia at this point. The USSR was backing Somalia before this point, but as these tensions between Ethiopia and Somalia start to boil over, and Somalia is kind of not really willing to come to the table and talk, the USSR ends up kind of pulling their support, and then they end up getting some soft backing from the US. But basically, Fidel Castro didn't just visit Ethiopia. They sent several thousand soldiers from Cuba to actually help Ethiopia deal with this solution. So they sent a bunch of people to. I'm trying to see. I have the number written down. I'm trying to look at my notes real quick. But they sent several thousand soldiers to Ethiopia to help kind of bolster their eastern border and help them deal with this war that's going on because of the whole Cold War politics of it all and stuff. So yeah,
that's incredible. Wow. But yeah, no, interesting that kind of lines up there anyway. Just in terms of what the dirge did for Ethiopia's literacy rates and stuff like that, really, really, really awesome stuff. So that's really good. Now, I'm guessing that the revolution doesn't really in terms of I guess the dirge being in power, I guess it doesn't really last that long because, as you said, that kind of fell apart when the USSR dissolved, right?
Yeah. So basically, the Dervish takes power in 1974, and throughout their entire rule, there are a number of different forces fighting against them. The basically when the Dervish takes over, and it kind of becomes apparent that they're not going to end the war in Eritrea to reclaim Eritrea. The EPLF and the ELF, which are the two forces in Eritrea fighting, they continue their fight against them. This is part of what splits the student movement, as the EPRP ends up backing the Eritrean Liberation Front as well. The TPLF is also fighting at this point. So they're fighting a lot of different forces at the time that are all like at least nominally left wing, that are kind of opposing them over what they're viewing as like Ethiopia's imperialist policies toward these different nations in Ethiopia. You have like the Oromo Liberation Front is another group that's fighting, and basically in 1991, the TPLF forms all of these different groups into a coalition. The EPRP is not included in this because the TPLF has essentially destroyed the EPRP at this point, because they were also fighting each other. And the TPLF kind of destroys them in the early 80s in Asmara, and the EPRP is still around. They're still around to this day, but they're kind of forced out of the war by this. And the TPLF forms a coalition with the EPLF and the OLF and some of the other different forces that are fighting the Ethiopian Democratic Front, and they form the EPRDF. And then that coalition kind of topples the Derg, as the Derg is kind of at this point propped up a lot by Soviet military aid. So once that's no longer available to them, they're not really able to sustain their fight against the EPRDF as much. And the EPRDF has been fighting for a long time at this point. So like, yeah,
that's actually like a huge thing that sent like ripples all around the world when that Soviet aid to other groups. I mean, that's like literally like it was because like we talk a lot of people have been talking a lot over the last couple of days about Hamas getting funding from Israel when it first started, but that alone wasn't like responsible for their rise. It was there were a bunch of like left-wing groups, like like really like good left-wing communist groups operating in Palestine, and a lot of them were getting funding from the Soviets and stuff to kind of fight back. And it was like, so when that funding dropped and that collapsed, and that's when the right-wing forces kind of like took up that power vacuum there. So it's like, yeah, it's I mean, like a lot of big like Soviet internationalist projects have always like stressed like critical support and like any kind of funding and everything for other socialist projects around the world and all these kind of things. And it's like, it's wild that like like that was so impactful, and then consequently the loss of it was so impactful as well.
No, if I can take a moment to connect the Ethiopian struggle to the Palestinian struggle, the Eritrean Liberation Front, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and the EPRP, they all received support from different Palestinian communist forces. I think pulled up right here so I can read it. But yeah, at the first Congress of the EPLF, they had representatives from the DFLP and from the PFLP, the Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, that were there helping them organize this and supporting them. And that's not just for the EPLF. The Palestinian movement for liberation, those people were very involved in the struggle for liberation in Ethiopia, and like the core leadership of the EPRP received training and arms in Palestine that became critical to them, overthrowing Haile Selassie. And it was a very similar reaction from the Ethiopian state to how Israel is reacting now to the Eritrean situation, where the Haile Selassie's regime, they were, and the Derg after them also were very insistent on painting all the people fighting for liberation in Eritrea as like Muslim extremists and as like anti-Christian forces manipulated by like foreign Arab states and stuff. So like the racist narrative that was constructed against Palestinians is very similar, almost the same to the racist narrative constructed against Eritreans to stop their movement for liberation. So there's a lot of connection between what's going on now and what happened in Eritrea and in Ethiopia at this point.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's super interesting and super sad. Shitty. Very shitty.
Yeah. There was we were also talking a little bit earlier about the because there was, you know, the period when Israel was repatriating, you know, well, yeah, like repatriating Jewish people from all around the world, and there was like it was a good chunk of Ethiopian Jews that were then brought to Israel and then kind of treated pretty horribly as well. And I know that that was also I've read before about how that was also tied into a lot of kind of anti-communist rhetoric. Like it was like a thing like, you're not going to be safe in Ethiopia because, you know, the communists are going to do this or that or whatever like that. And then like,
and they go to
them,
like
transplanted to Israel and then have to suffer all the things and worse that they were told the communists were going to do to them, which is like, yeah, just wild.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's very absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to what happened with the dirge and like the sort of like, I guess, the collapse of the dirge. What was the sort of like, I guess, because it's super interesting that there were like all these like you know, pretty interesting, pretty like, you know, viable and productive socialist reforms to a bunch of policies in Ethiopia at the time. But then, as you say, like a lot of them were purged by the dirge, and then after that, like what was the outcome for Ethiopians after 1991 when the dirge was kind of like, you know, ousted?
Yeah, so it's a difficult situation, right? I mean, like when the state has kind of just collapsed and been, you know, taken over by other forces. So at this point, the TPLF, while they kind of in their public statements at this point in like 1991, they're saying like, oh yeah, we aren't strictly Marxist Leninist anymore, but we still have like Marxist elements or whatever. But their coalition is kind of in power, and it takes a while before Ethiopians actually get real democracy. Like there are protests and stuff of election processes for years in advance. There also before Eritrea gets like its full actual independence, there's a small border war between Eritrea and the new ruling party of Ethiopia. That ends up being mediated by the UN, and Eritrea essentially becomes their own nation after this. But yeah, so by this point within Ethiopia, people are still living under some of the feudal conditions, but there's been a bit of a progression, and there's kind of once again, like this new government is kind of taking up the same project that both previous states before it are taking, of trying to modernize Ethiopia and bring some sort of centralized stability to this state. And this kind of by 2013 to 2015, it starts being pretty large protests to bring reform to this new government that make it more democratic, and then those democratic reforms pave the way for Abiy Ahmed to be elected to prime minister. Him and his party.
It's kind of what kind of platform was he running on then?
I know one of the significant things about his election is that he was Oromo. So Oromo are one of the peoples within Ethiopia, and I think they're one of the main groups that have a lot of history of land alienation with the Ethiopian state, especially after the conquest of Menelik II, when he kind of built the centralized Ethiopian state that Haile Selassie comes to inherit. There, a lot of Oromo lands are annexed, or they're alienated from them. A lot of them are given out to different political figures as rewards to, you know, broker support and stuff. And Haile Selassie also does that. For example, Addis Ababa is the capital city of Ethiopia, and that city is actually built on stolen Oromo land. Is one example. Like land reform, like those kind of land reforms, and like kind of more a more fair deal for the different nationalities within Ethiopia was kind of one of the big questions. One of the big questions that people had for him, and also trying to kind of bring a solution to some of the struggles that Oromo people have faced within Ethiopia as well. And I think his party was also like running on a socialist platform as well, which I think the majority of political parties that ever have any measure of power in Ethiopia at this point are all some measure of socialist. At least
okay, so like that's super interesting, because I think one of the things that is always like, because the USSR isn't really, I guess, applicable because Russia, I think its unique amount of power that it held caused it to, you know, a lot of people within the USSR to become corrupt towards the end of its existence, as it were. And so now you have things like Putin, you know, various different like horrific neoliberal policies and governments and stuff like that, not very much for the people. But then when you look at like places like, you know, where socialism has persisted after a revolution, like Ethiopia, for example, you know, also Cuba, where like, you know, arguably like the revolution is still a thing, you know, like everyone always calls the government the revolution kind of thing. It's really interesting to see like that, like those things persist, like these sort of like smaller revolutions where, you know, they weren't focused on a world stage. Although I guess you could argue Cuba is kind of focused on like quite frequently by the US. Yeah. But so super interesting. So even to this day, they have like socialist, you know, policies, socialist politicians and stuff like that. And of course, you mentioned that there was the genocide of was it the Tigrayan people, Eritrean people? Yes. I can't remember.
The Tigray genocide.
Yeah. Do you want to talk with us a little bit about that and like what kind of like shaped that in Ethiopia and where that came from?
Yeah. So basically, it all kind of starts when in 2015, 2016, when Abiy Ahmed starts to, you know, take power. So after he takes power and he kind of reorganizes the political structure of Ethiopia, he kind of starts his own political party that's also a coalition party made up of a lot of the same groups from the previous one. The reason why they did it was because a lot of people felt that the previous iteration of the state was built to favor Tigrayans over other people. So the goal with this reorganization was to make a more equal kind of setup. But basically after this happens, there's a lot of frustration from Tigrayans and from the TPLF specifically over what's taken place. So basically in 2020, these tensions kind of boil over because COVID forces elections to be postponed, and the TPLF, when elections are postponed, the TPLF kind of jumps on this and they kind of claim that this is like an anti-democratic move to like stop elections. And they're claiming that the Prosperity Party, which is the party that Abiy Ahmed has created, is trying to do this undemocratic move to hold on to power and prevent elections from pushing them out of power. So they basically, in response to this, they attack an Ethiopian military base in Tigray, and that kind of sparks the war. And it kind of spirals out of control from there, because there are acts of ethnic cleansing on both sides of this military, and there is like, when the whole situation unfolds, there's kind of this vibe from the US when they're talking about it, that their only really interested involvement is as some like Cold War with China type stuff. Like the US is going like, why isn't China getting involved in the situation and mediating this? But meanwhile, the US is also like low key selling weapons to both sides of the war.
Yeah.
It's same old story.
Ridiculous. But yeah, this war kind of spirals out of control and becomes a genocide, especially as Abiy Ahmed kind of uses the resources of the Ethiopian state to cut off Tigray from basically any form of resources or like food aid from other nations. So like Tigrayan civilians are like being starved And like meanwhile, the TPLF is like going into villages and like slaughtering people who don't speak Tigrinya and stuff. So it's like there's a whole thing going on. But this war basically it ends in November of last year when they finally reach peace agreements. And Abiy Ahmed finally begins to allow aid to go into Tigray. So there are still kind of tensions right now, but as of now, it looks like there is a kind of shaky peace. But yeah, there's other conflicts kind of starting to boil, like between the OLF and the Amhara Liberation Fronts a bit. So it's just it's a very, what's the word? Very messy
situation. Yeah.
It's snappy.
Yeah, obviously that's it really sucks. But I think I guess like the learning the whole history is like super important to, I guess, understanding where this current situation is coming from, kind of thing. Like again, like you say, like you know, the Oromo peoples having like a leader that represents them after being like, you know, so what's the word, oppressed, and then that like a similar thing, but then happening to Tigrayans, and as a result of all this other stuff, and it's just like Jesus Christ, like just so much stuff going on. But again, I think it comes down to like you know, we have it like so much, and it's where we always talk about how things are exported to places in the imperial periphery, and it's like, you know, again, like a country that has been oppressed and fed by colonization has, you know, resulted in, you know, having some horrific you know, nationalistic, I guess, elements to it. You know, it's just vile, but like, of course, these are like attitudes that could, you know, easily come from colonizing powers. Like I always think about Uganda, where like the first man to be sentenced to death for homosexuality, aggravated homosexuality, they're calling it, is now currently waiting a death sentence for that right now. And again, Uganda, before it was colonized, had a bisexual king. Like, it's widely documented that the king had, you know, male and female concubines. It was very normal to be queer, very normal to be LGBTQIA plus in Africa until colonialism happened. And in terms of like that kind of inference, how much would you say you know, that like colonialism affected what was going on in Ethiopia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it had a huge effect. I mean, Ethiopia has this reputation that they've never been colonized, that they like take a lot of pride in, and that's true to an extent. But even without having been directly colonized in necessarily the traditional sense that we understand, like there were elements of colonial dealings in how the British dealt with Ethiopia after they helped them win back their independence from Italy. I mean, obviously, like the Italian invasions of Ethiopia and the brief amount of time they held power there are like colonization. But the entire attempt to construct the Ethiopian state, a centralized Ethiopian state to bring all of these nations into this one particular way of existing, is a response to colonialism. Basically, when Italians invaded in the late 1800s and tried to take over Ethiopia, Menelik relied on, you know, working with all the other different nations in Ethiopia to push these people out. And then his ongoing project during that and afterward to build a centralized Ethiopian state was basically, it kind of was his attempt to colonize Ethiopia before the colonizers did. And that's why a lot of the dealings with these different peoples in Ethiopia are very colonized. Like for one example, under Haile Selassie, Amharic is the like central language of Ethiopia, and people who don't speak that language, who like speak other languages, aren't allowed to teach them in schools. You know, like you have what are very, very typical colonial dealings that you would see in like settler colonial nations or in other nations being done in Ethiopia by Ethiopians to other Ethiopians. And that's kind of where some of the problem of discussing colonialism in Ethiopia comes from, because Ethiopia has, quote unquote, technically never been colonized, partly because Ethiopia is sometimes the colonizer. And yeah, if you talk to, you know, peoples within the Horn of Africa, within Somalia and the Ogaden region, and, you know, Oromo lands and in different places, they'll kind of tell that same story.
Yeah, and again, like you say, like that attempt to colonize, like you know, just I guess like as I don't even know how you'd call that, like, you know, self-colonization. You know, that in itself is a response to colonialism, right? I'm sort of like reminded by the notion that like white people in Europe have absolutely no idea what our like indigenous history truly is, because it's been fucking destroyed because of like, you know, Roman Empire and various other like, you know, invasions and stuff like that. You know, and it's like essentially we're like colonized, but also the colonizers. It's kind of like, sounds kind of similar, you know?
Yeah, like the project of statecraft and of like building a homogenous identity under one state is like a colonial process that has to fold all these different peoples into one group. Like even there's a discussion I have sometimes with indigenous comrades where they talk about how in Mexico the state has kind of appropriated indigenous identity and like Aztec identity as part of its narrative to maintain control in a way that's erased other indigenous peoples, that's erased other indigenous languages and stuff, and has ended up aiding in the settler colonial project of, you know, destroying the history and the culture of indigenous peoples within
yeah. I definitely saw that traveling through Mexico and talking to people and learning about things there, this idea, and it kind of reminds me of over here we have this like amalgamated what they call like the Kiwi identity, and it's you know, it like takes like the best things from Maori and like the kind of like just all these other things and like kind of like creates this modern like unified thing where, you know, so that the government can go like, oh, we're all one, we're all this together or whatever, and it just kind of like brushes over all of the bad stuff. Or also like, I don't know, you know, like it there's one thing that I always think about is like the tradition of like radical, particularly Maori protest movements that have at the time been like super maligned, but then have been kind of vindicated by, you know, like how things have progressed over the years. And that being like this thing where they're like, this was us, this was, you know, the Kiwis, we did this. And it's like, no, it was like a very small group of people that were like almost universally hated at the time, maligned in the media and stuff like that. But then it's like, you know, it was like, usually it was like, this was particularly like, you know, like poor indigenous, you know, like queer people and stuff, and then it's like, no, this is all of us now. But,
what comes to my mind when you say that, Tim, is whenever I see the All Blacks play and they do the haka.
Oh yeah. It's that's another thing. It's like, so that's something that like, you know, we always talk about like how, you know, like white people love a good haka, they love like all of that kind of stuff, but it's like they don't want to actually engage with like what it means, or like even like the tradition behind it. And like, yeah, it's, I don't know, it is frustrating. It's like this thing, you know, absorbing it into the national identity, and that also kind of like the idea of us being like one nation also kind of like it helps to work against like things like you know, like native like land claims, and like you know, like even just like the idea that there is like our founding document, like the treaty, like kind of says very specific things about, you know, like about like the crown and like Europeans, and then as and Maori and stuff like that. And it's kind of like this thing where it just kind of papers over a lot of that and goes like, we don't need to worry about that because we're all one people now. So it's a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I noticed the same thing happening in Mexico, where it was like, you know, there were like a lot of people, like I saw there were a lot of people wearing like t-shirts and hoodies and stuff where they would say like, you know, it'd be like, I'm not Mexican, and then they would have like the name of like, you know, their like local indigenous group and stuff, or they'd be like, I'm not Hispanic, not Latino, you know, nothing like that. Like, this is what I am, you know. And I thought that was super interesting, because it's not even a discussion that I had really even known, like I had known about, like I hadn't even thought about it. Like, oh yeah, of course, there's like this long history of, like colonization and the absorption of different, I guess, like cultural groups and stuff into like the wider political project or whatever.
Yeah, state obfuscation. So yeah, like obviously this is like an absolutely amazing story, and like tell us about like the thought process of you like, starting out and doing this video, because it's such a long video. It's absolutely incredible. Like I'm desperate to find some time to watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the thought process behind you like starting off doing this?
Oh man. Okay, so basically when the whole Ethiopia Tigray war broke out in 2020, I was very curious about the situation and what was going on, especially because Western media has a tendency to do this thing with foreign conflicts, especially in Africa, to reduce it to like tribal conflicts between tribes of people. And I'm like, these are nations of like millions of people with like languages and complex identities and like their own art. This is like, these are not just tribes. Like I hate that term because it makes it sound like there's like 50 people fighting like in a mud pit somewhere. Like it's a very racist conception of what's happening that the Western media is conjuring up when they talk about what's happening. So I got kind of frustrated by that, and I wanted to have a better understanding of what was going on. And the more I like looked into these different groups, and I realized like there's like a history of like a whole revolution here that is not told, I got more curious, especially because like I'll see sometimes where there'll be some people who will like, they'll have like posters or flyers or whatever that'll be like the Ethiopian Revolution from 1974 to 1978 or whatever. And then I would be looking at the history and everything, and they'll be like, well, wait, these groups are still in power for like this amount of time, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm like, I feel like there's a detail missing here. That's like, there's a story that's implied by the way people are not talking about this story, if that makes sense. So I got very into the subject, and I started with making a video about Ethiopia that was kind of just the like pre-revolution history. So I got kind of just kind of into like how like Haile Selassie's reign, like how he came to power. I got in like Ethiopia during World War II and like the post-World War period. And that first video, which is like 50 minutes, it stops right as the Eritrean struggle for liberation begins. So the next video ended up, I realized after finishing that video and like starting as I was finishing that video and starting to get into the next things I would want to talk about, like I'm gonna have to, not only am I gonna have to split this up, but it's going to be a very long project, because I was like reading and they're like, oh yeah, the Ethiopian student movement led to the whole revolution, and I'm like, and then the sources would like not give any more information on the students, and I'm like, okay, well I have to know what's going on here before I can. It was this endless cycle of like, oh, I have to know this before I can talk about this, and then I have to know this before I can talk about that, and it just kept going and kept going and kept going. It's just like a very dense topic.
Yeah, and it seems so dense as well. Yeah, it's always, you see this so much with every single kind of, I do want to touch on the Western media, style of reporting thing, because as you said, rightfully so, it's extremely racist. They're attempting to conjure images, at least in the UK here, of things like Zulu, like the film Zulu, where the British redcoats are surrounded by what they would call savage Africans, and it's just like such a fucked sort of like it's iconography, right? It's iconography that makes people go, right, oh, okay, like I've categorized what people like that are like in my head, so when someone refers to it, that's what I go to in my head, and that's just what they're trying to appeal to. And it does so much of a bad job of really representing like African nations, not just like you say, not just like the state of Ethiopia, but like the nations within the state, like the different ethnicities, like the different just all the different struggles that go on within that. Like it's such a vast, and again, like the size of Africa, like the sheer size of Africa is something that is really like understated.
Yeah,
when it comes to like white people's understanding, like white Western imperial core understandings. Like if we're talking about like Ethiopia in itself, it's huge.
Yeah, Ethiopia by itself is like almost the size of the entire like Midwestern United States.
Yeah,
like it's huge. It's a huge country.
Yeah, just to sort of like build it down. It would literally be like saying that about the Midwest of the United States. It's like, oh yeah, there's a, like, you know, if there's some kind of like civil war that breaks out in America or something like that, and then they'll be reporting on it. Oh yeah, it's just a disagreement between families, a disagreement between tribes. You know, it's like, what are you talking about? You know, and again, I think that a lot of that obfuscation comes from, and again, like the obfuscation that you experienced in like hearing about this revolution and like, well, what's actually happened, that it goes against you know, colonialist, imperialist, capitalist interests, because if they were if it was really there for everybody to see, like the actual thing that happened, it would be like, oh right, okay, yeah, no, they rose up against you know, a monarchistic imperialist sort of, you know, force, and employed a bunch of socialist reforms that made people's lives better.
No, like the way that the way people talk about this completely misses the complexity of the politics. It's so frustrating because it's fascinating. Like the student politics of the Ethiopian revolution are fascinating, and it's like I don't understand why there's not a movie about this, because at times the story is very dramatic. Like again, you have these two bitter rivals in Haile Fida and Berhane Meskoreda who end up dying in the same prison. Like that in and of itself is a story, and it's a very intense and very real, very tragic story of like
that's like, if you put it in a movie, that'd be like, that's too on the nose, you know, like that would never happen.
Literally, if there some of the things that happen in the Ethiopian revolution, like if I were the editor of the person who wrote this, I would be like, you're a hack and a fraud, don't ever write it. You're just so ham-fisted, like it's crazy. Like there's one of my favorite it's a completely crazy story of the Ethiopian revolution, but basically there's a point where there's a purge going on at the imperial palace of some of the people within the dirge, and one of the people whose job it is to investigate people to be purged gets so fed up with the killing that he basically goes to the office of one of the dudes who's a leader of the dirge and just shoots him. And like just he literally, I have the story written down because it's just crazy. But this dude, he just gets fed up. He walks to the security guard because he tries to leave. And the dude tells him like, "Oh, Mengistu said no one can leave the palace right now." So he gets fed up. He tells the security guard, "Okay, come with me. We're gonna go to this dude's office." I think let me see. I think his name was Daniel Asfa. Let me see.
And what was this guy, like a bureaucrat or like a state official or?
Yeah, he was like one of the lead investigators for the dirge.
Right.
Yeah, he was one of the lead investigators for the dirge. So he basically goes to the office of the right hand man to Mengistu and like shoots him, and then he shoots the security guard that brought him to the office. And then he leaves the office, and as he's walking down the hall, Sine Leakey, the dude we mentioned before, wrong place, wrong time, is just coming down the stairs, and the dude sees him and is like, "Oh, well, I might as well shoot you too." And then he barricades himself in one of the offices, and the dirge can't. They have a whole shootout with him where they try to get him out of there, and they can't get him out. So they call the one of the military dudes, and they just drive a tank through the wall and collapse the whole room on him. Yeah. I wish I was making that up.
Yeah,
like there should be a film about this. We should make the film about this.
We should make the film about this, and I want to drive the tank.
Hell yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, there's so much that's like, again, like I think it all comes back to this, that people do not the powers that be, the ruling elite, they don't want people to hear about these stories. Because I you know, at the start of this segment, I spoke about how we always talk about how the revolution is going to come from the imperial periphery, and this is an example of technically the imperial periphery. It was, of course, like an imperialist country, but you know, it's outside of the imperial core. You could probably argue that the imperial core was like, you know, just coming into its own around 1970s, towards the 80s, the advent of neoliberalism, right? And again, like you still, like it is so, I guess, pertinent to how things are reported on nowadays, like the reporting on the Sri Lanka uprising. You know, like we covered that extensively on Red Planet, and you know, you wouldn't hear anything remotely, in terms of like, what the politics are of the people who were doing it. And they were all overwhelmingly leftist. They were all overwhelmingly socialist. They wanted socialist reforms. They wanted leftist reforms. And again, like, other sort of like revolutionary things that have been going on like over the decades, over the years, they're just not reported on accurately because it's gonna tell people a story that it's inconvenient for the ruling elite to have them here.
They don't want us getting ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna give people ideas, and it's also gonna, I guess it's going to get people reading up on this stuff, because there are of course the vast, like if they did report on it accurately, there's obviously the vast swathe of people who would respond in a racist, reactionary manner and say, oh, it's just whatever, it's those people over there and they're doing this, that's just how they are and they don't know how to govern themselves, they need foreign intervention, right? They'll have that kind of an idea. But then there are genuinely people who will go, hang on a minute, I want to know what's going on there. And they'll read up about it and they'll be like, oh, okay. And that's what the material conditions are like for those people. Oh, this is what the exporting of labor is doing to people. This is what the wealth extraction of resources is doing to people, et cetera, et cetera.
It's the same reason they don't want us to, like, they're censoring people who are talking about what's happening in Palestine right now. They don't want people to know what's really going on, because if they did, most people wouldn't support it. The whole apparatus of capitalist oppression relies on keeping people ignorant. And the more ways people find to get information on their own, the more they will find ways to destroy it, and the more that they will want to quash it. Because ultimately, they very nakedly have no real justification for the oppression, for the violence, and for the genocide. They have to make it up.
Yeah.
They have to keep us from finding out the truth about it.
I think that's like such a great point. And we see this like reflected in popular figures. One of the most embarrassing things that has happened like over the last few days is Justin Bieber posting a picture of Gaza absolutely flattened and saying, I stand with Israel. Like just completely getting everything wrong. What's her face from the Halloween movies? I forget her name. Jamie Lee Curtis posted like a bunch of Gazan children crying, saying, I stand with Israel, like, justice for Israel. And it's like, you posted Gazan children. Like, that's how big the disconnect is. That's how big the the consent manufacturing machine works.
I almost question if it's even like accidental. Like,
right,
there's a view of it where it's on purpose, where they're trying to mislead people, but there's also just like a very sinister view of it. Like they know that they're posting videos, like pictures of Gaza being destroyed and putting "I stand with Israel" over it, and they know what that implies. Like there's like they're doing it on accident because they're ignorant, or are they really that ignorant, and are they just very intentionally telling us, mask off what they are and what they believe?
So
people show you they are, you believe them. You know what I mean?
Yes,
it's always the case, but I definitely feel like it's a question to be asked, like how accidental is this for some people?
Well, I imagine what some of them are doing is they're going, I don't know fucking anything about this. I'm gonna get my PR agent to do this for me, my social media agent or whatever, because I know they all have them. And they'll be like, do a post about Israel and Gaza and stuff. Like, what should I say about it? What should I say? And the PR person is going to say, oh, well, the money's in the both sides thing at the moment. Like, you should both sides this. Like, that should be your position. And they're going, okay. And then they just, they'll be like, find me some pictures of Israeli kids that are dying or something. Okay, great. And they can't. They can't find any of that.
You Google Israel kids dead, and it just comes up with, it'll be a story will be like Israel bombs Gaza, whatever, and they won't even read it. They'll just save the picture.
Yeah.
The sad result of it is that like whether it's by ignorance or malice, the result is the same.
Yeah. And like the wild thing is, it would be totally easy. So say, Justin Bieber, Jamie Lee Curtis, whatever, puts up a picture saying, I stand with Israel, and it's like a picture actually of Palestinian people, that it would be so easy for them to take that down and put up another thing and be like, hey, look, like obviously this, this Hamas attack is really terrible and blah, 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 whatever, but I also stand with the Palestinian people, and like they could have made a statement that says like, okay, look, like there's obviously a lot of people you know, that are in Palestine that aren't aligned with Hamas, and they're victims, and those are the people whose pictures I have just posted. You know, it's like it would be so easy for someone to do something like that, but they just don't. It just disappears.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like I think that kind of tells you a little bit more about like what people's intentions are, right?
Yeah, yeah. People flatten it to a discussion of like, does Israel have a right to defend? Do you believe Israel has a right to defend itself? Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. That's never the question. This isn't self-defense.
Yeah.
That simply is the problem. This is if Israel was in a situation where they were defending themselves, I would have support them unequivocally. But this is not self-defense. This is colonization.
Yeah.
You know, and colonization is indefensible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bringing it back round to that discussion is so important, because it's like, you know, we're seeing this from multiple you know, angles right now, and just how it all like ties in together. And I think that's like our job here at Red Planet is, you know, Sophie said it like 2 years ago when we were trying to set this up, it's seizing the means of communication, right? It's like having a platform where like you can actually like do as good as you can to report on the things that you know are happening, in you know, against the tidal wave of just horror and misinformation about that kind of stuff. I guess just while we're sort of like coming to the end of the segment before questions, is there anything else that you wanted to mention that we've not covered already?
Nothing I can think of immediately off the top of my head. I'm sure someone will ask a question that'll make me remember it, but yeah.
Defo. Yeah, no, I think yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating learning about that, because again, like, you know, revolutions come in all shapes and sizes, like different types of revolution, different ways that things happen, you know. And I think it's also definitely really pertinent to talk about now that there are other African nations who are throwing off the shackles of, like, you know, I don't like using the word like actual colonialism, because I don't want to put down like the struggle of the, you know, Eritrean peoples and you know, various ethnicities within Ethiopia, but like, you know, I guess like traditional colonialism would be a better term for it. You know, we're seeing like Gabon and Niger alongside like, you know, a bunch of different African nations who are like, you know, saying fuck you to France, which is just phenomenal in my opinion. Anyone who says fuck you to the French government based, let's go, especially as they are like, you know, again, like connecting the dots to like what's going on. Like, you know, France were basically saying, no, it is illegal to protest the Palestinian genocide. Like, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to talk about it. So, you know, it's very good that other African nations are finally saying like, fuck off. And it gives us like a better sort of like understanding of, you know, the struggles of the African people. I think like, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, Anansi, but like, I think like, you know, seeing a lot more like African nations come together and standing together and saying like, yo, listen, you know, we want to govern ourselves. We want a better life for the African people. We want, you know, socialist reforms. We want, you know, left-leaning reforms and stuff like that. It's got to be one of the more exciting things that's happening, I think, at the moment, because you know, obviously there's I can't remember the exact name, but there's like the Council of African Nations that are sort of coming together and saying like, no, you've got to let France govern you still, or something, or you got to like give concessions to France and stuff. And there's this like block of 4 or 5 nations that are saying, yeah, we're not doing that, and we're going to fight you if you try and make us do that. So I think like, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, I was just saying, I think it's got to be like one of the more like exciting things to come, you know, out of like news from the imperial periphery.
Yeah, no, yeah. So it definitely is, and I know like in the past when things like this have been done, like during Haile Selassie's regime, there was kind of a similar attempt going on with the AOU, the African Union. And Haile Selassie was actually kind of on the right wing end of this split between what was called the Monrovia Bloc and the Casablanca Bloc, which basically the Monrovia Bloc was like, I can't remember all the nations that were in it, but I know Haile Selassie, Ethiopia was part of it, and they were kind of like an anti-communist wing within Africa that was kind of helping to push back on some of the things like Thomas Sankara and like other, you know, other African communists were doing at the time to try and further the cause of liberation and further, you know, the cause of anti-imperialism in Africa.
Yeah. It's a real like it makes a lot of sense, because when you learn about like Burkina Faso and Thomas Sankara, like, you know, that whole like, yeah, like the betrayal and like the pushback from all the other African nations that he got was just like so horrific. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if like, I don't think Haile Selassie was like, was he assassinated, or I don't know, like.
Okay, so
Because it just says he died in prison.
It's actually very funny. It's actually
okay.
It's a very funny story. I didn't talk about this in the actual 2-hour video, but I made a little small like 10-minute video afterward where I kind of go off on this tangent, because it would have been very tonally inconsistent to talk about what happens to him after he dies and talk about the rest of the video, because it's inherently very comedic. So basically when the military deposes Haile Selassie, they keep him in in house arrest at the palace for a while before they decide to move him to another jail, another place where they're holding him. And basically at this point he's like, at this point he's like 80 something. He's like 81. He's old as balls. And he's like, there are some allegations that he wasn't even really like what's the word? Like he was starting to kind of go senile. So he wasn't even, like they like, I read one report that said like at the time that he was under house arrest, he didn't even know that a revolution had happened and he thought everything was just normal. So, yeah, so around that time he also he ends up having prostate surgery or whatever, and then afterwards he's moved to the other facility where he's being held. And now some people allege that he was strangled in his cell by the dirge and they killed him. And then others allege that he died of complications. The dirge claimed that he died of complications because of his surgery. And it's also possible he just died because he was old as hell. That just like died in his cell like randomly. And the thing is, people will claim that the dirge killed him, but like I don't think they did it. And like, I'm not a dirge apologist at all. They suck for a lot of reasons, but here's the reason why I don't think they did it. Because just me, if I were Mengistu, if I were like one of the leaders of the dirge at the time, and I killed Haile Selassie, there is no way in hell I wouldn't tell everyone. That's the thing. Like, why would you not claim that clout?
They would boast.
It doesn't make sense. And that's not even getting the fact that like the forensic evidence on his bones showed that he wasn't strangled to death, or at least that's what's been said, that like there's no evidence that he was like forcibly killed in any way on his bones.
Also, they wouldn't strangle him. They would shoot him. Like, surely they would like do.
There's got to be other ways to do that.
Right.
And then he was old as hell. He had just had surgery, like life threatening surgery, and he was already senile. Like, it's not unreasonable that he just died. Yeah. But like, what's funny is what they do with his body after he dies, because I don't know what their beef with this man was, but Mengistu basically has them encase his bones in a block of concrete, and then they use that specific block of concrete as the block of concrete under the office toilet. Yeah, I'm not lying. And he's there, being shat on every day for like 20 years before they finally find him.
Holy shit.
They're like, oh crap. I think in like sometime in the early 2000s, they finally find his body, like on accident, and then they give him a normal burial. But yeah, it's a crazy story. It's a crazy story.
Yeah.
That's so extreme. That's
so unbelievable. Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, we've made it. We got to the questions part. Like, that's where we're at now. We're at the bit where the chat asks questions. Who wants to ask the first one?
I'll do it.
Okay.
This is from Stealth Intel. How did the student council groups deal with the lead up to the ousting, such as public forum or internal meetings?
Yeah, so the build up to the actual moment of the revolution was like a very contentious moment among the students. Because another one of the things that was kind of splitting them was some of how they were reacting to the building tensions. Because this is in 1972 and stuff, that some of the students are like, we're going to form armed organizations right now. in 1972, like the early 1970s, there are students who are like hijacking planes to fly to Eritrea to like to receive training and stuff, or like fly to other countries to get training and weapons and stuff so they can come back and, you know, start the revolution in Ethiopia. The EPRP is one of the first groups to really jump on this, and they're one of the first groups of students to actually successfully pull off a plane hijacking, and like they go to Algiers to get training and stuff, and that's when they have interactions with like Palestinian Liberation Front and all these different groups. So some of the students, and this is particularly where some of the divide between EPRP and Mamason comes in, because Haile Fida and his organization, Haile Fida's personal view is that the revolution isn't going to take place for like 25 years. He's like, yeah, we're not gonna get the actual revolution for another 25 years. And he's like really on that wave. And then the EPRP and their people, they're like, no, it's going to happen like any day now. Like we need to start forming armed organizations now. We need to at this like we need to straight like not even no pun intended, like we need to graduate from student movement to like actual political party with teeth and like, you know, the ability to commit acts of armed violence and stuff on behalf of our political project and that sort of thing. So the reaction is very split. And then when the revolution actually happens, Haile Fida, like he basically immediately moves to back to Ethiopia because he's staying. I think he's staying in Europe at this point because he's one of the leaders of the Ethiopian Student Union in Europe. But he comes back to Ethiopia and like opens a bookstore as like a front for the all Ethiopian socialist movement and starts working toward furthering the revolution. So he's him and his wing, they're like off by a lot on when the revolution's actually going to take place. But that's kind of how they're all reacting as the tensions are building.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, so we got another one here. There's an interesting one from Yucca Mountain Johnny. What external imperial pressures were acting in opposition to the revolution? Any particular Western corporations or governments working at destabilization?
This is actually a pretty interesting topic. So one of the only real avenues at this point is so there's the CELU, which is the main Ethiopian labor union at this point. And at the buildup of the revolution, this is something that's kind of created by like U.S. foreign interference to kind of have like a stable hand on the Ethiopian labor movement. But when the Ethiopian revolution starts to build up and people from the student movement start to join that union, they work to radicalize it, and then that union becomes a very important part of, you know, furthering the revolution once it starts. But at this point that the revolution is happening, the U.S. is very heavily involved in Vietnam, and it's not going well. And there's really wouldn't be a lot of public support for a lot of U.S. intervention in Ethiopia. So while they're keeping tabs on the situation, the U.S. is actually very uncharacteristically not getting super involved in what's going on. Once their labor unions are kind of pushed out, and they're actually until I think 1978. I think until 1978, the U.S. is actually still technically supplying the Dirge with military support. Because it's weird. It's weird. I feel like it's kind of the Dirge kind of takes power and then they're getting the support and they're just like, just don't tell them they're still giving us this. But
just keep cashing the checks.
Yeah, and Mengistu just basically keeps that support until he knows he can get support from the Soviet Union, and then he like him and the U.S. and Ethiopia kind of slowly start to disassociate from each other. Like the U.S. kind of quietly and unceremoniously stopped sending military aid around 1978 as Mengistu is like solidifying his connections with the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Interesting. So, Just Johnny asks, don't know if it was covered, but what remained the biggest struggle post-revolution, whether external sanctions or internal problems?
Definitely internal problems. I think one of the big struggles post-revolution is that like one of the central questions of the revolution wasn't answered, which is the national question. You know, the whole point was to find a way for these different nations to equitably exist around each other, and that question still hasn't fully been answered. There's still struggles along that line, and I feel like the splits that devolved and opened up over that question are, I think, one of the things that caused the revolution to kind of go in the direction it did, especially with, you know, moments like Haile Fida choosing to support the dirge and to walk out on unification talks between the two main student organizations. I think was one of the major damning moments of the revolution.
Cool. Kara, do you want to do the last one?
Yes. Last one is from It Is Me, Crystal. How do you find and evaluate reliable information sources when you research topics like this, where many of the most available or prominent sources have a vested interest in falsifying or obfuscating what actually happened? Obfuscating, excuse me. I always say that word wrong.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was important to me was trying to find primary sources. They're scattered. They're very scattered across the internet, but like one of the books that I read is called The Quest for Socialist Utopia by a historian named Baru Zawaidi. He's was actually part of the student movement, so his account of the revolution and everything was very important for my research. I found a lot of articles and stuff online that were written directly by people who were involved in the student movement. I found like a YouTube channel that I linked them in the video because their channel was extremely helpful. But they had like old footage of the revolution, like actual like students marching, like meetings and stuff with the dirge.
That's cool.
Like they had just a whole archive of just video of the Ethiopian. It was I was so happy when I found it. I almost cried. It was amazing. It was amazing. It's just like a lot of just like videos from random YouTube accounts of someone who screen recorded something they had on a videotape on their phone just to post on YouTube, and it's like family video of the revolution and stuff. I had
that rules.
I had a lot of help from Ethiopian comrades who, you know, helped me translate things and helped me to understand things. Like that was a really big help that I received. I also one of the books I read was called what was it called? It's called like Ho Chi Minh like Che Guevara by a man named Ian Scott Horst. And his account of the revolution was also very helpful. And he's not like Ethiopian, but his account of the revolution still was pretty good. But yeah, so it was an effort of getting information from a lot of different places as directly to the source as I possibly could.
That's
so
cool.
Awesome.
Interestingly, on the sources, you didn't reference any of Comrade Sene Likker's book on the Ethiopian Revolution, which is the main thing that is referenced as a source in the Wikipedia article, which is nowhere near as
definitely not nearly as complete.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very funny. I'm like, I've been just like sort of skim reading a little bit of this as the episode's been going on, but it's like, yeah, there's definitely some like interesting things that Sene talked about. Anyway, yeah, really awesome, Anansi. Thank you so much. As you probably remember from the last time that you came on the show, we love to give our little nerds, our viewers, listeners, Twitch chatters, all watching, listening at home, some homework at the end of every show. Have you considered the potential homework for this episode?
Yes, I have considered the potential homework for this episode, and I have two things. I have two pieces of homework for people.
Okay.
One is join a local mutual aid group. If there's a mutual aid group in your area, join them and help do mutual aid. Get involved in your community and get involved in helping other people. And if there's not one of those groups in your area, then your job is to start one with your friends. Get some friends that you trust together and start that organizing, and, you know, try to fill that niche in your community. And also,
hell yeah. Sorry, go on, Anansi. What were you going to say?
Oh, the last thing, just pet a cat.
Pet a cat.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Awesome.
It's actually my cat's birthday today, so that's like great homework.
Dee Dee's birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll definitely get some homework in later.
Hell yeah. So Anansi, tell us where everyone can find you, plug all your stuff.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube. My YouTube channel's name is obviously Anansi's Library. I'm also I'm also on Twitter. My Twitter is or X, whatever it's called now. We're misgendering Twitter, but my Twitter is at local punk Anansi. And then I also am on Instagram and TikTok, also just as Anansi's Library. I'm easy to find. Yeah. Also, I have a Patreon where I post like the scripts to my videos before I post them, like the audio tracks before they get posted. I also post like poetry that I write and short stories and stuff like that there. So yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Please go and support Anansi wherever you can find him. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a really informative, really awesome episode. Yeah, I look forward to having you back at some point.
Hell yeah, thank you for having me. I look forward to coming back.
Awesome.
No worries.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah, I'll see you later.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being here and listening to the show today. We got a little thing to do for you now. Oh, what is it? Everyone knows it's time for the Patreon call out time. Give us money hour. Yeah. What
full hour of it?
A whole massive hour of us just telling you why you should give us money. But we are, in all seriousness, really, really close to achieving our goal. Our goal, I believe, is $1,100 a month or something like that.
Yeah.
But we're super, super close to getting that. As Conrad was telling me in my ear earlier, we're at $950. So
close.
What would that be if we could do some quick maths to reference a dead meme? $2 a month. If we had like 75 people who donated £2 or $2 or $3.50 New Zealand dollars a month, that would get us to our goal.
We're also trying to raise money for Sophie to come out to America next month, but
yes,
I don't know if we're going to be able to make that deadline. But if there's any people that were sitting on some cash and they would like us to raise a few more thousand, that'd be super.
Yeah, get it done. Get it donated. But yeah, anyway, speaking of the tiers, let's go through the tiers first anyway. £2 a month. Oh, by the way, it's patreon.com/red_planet in case you didn't know. But you can support us from as little as £2 a month, $2 a month, $3.50 New Zealand dollars a month. Get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. Benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you're helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, and access to the Red Planet Discord. Wow, what amazing amount of benefits. But Kara, what's the next one?
It's Goblin mode. Can you believe it?
Whoa!
You can actually go Goblin mode for real. You can have it. Yeah, you can become a goblin for as little as $10 a month or £8.50.
Whoa!
And then
you got it right.
Something in New Zealand.
It's $17.50 plus GST. Yeah.
Plus GST. Everyone loves a goblin. We all get a little goblin mode from time to time. Complete your gobology by going goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode and a pack of cool Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only in places like that, and access to the exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts.
Wow, we have amazing hangouts, and maybe there might be a hangout coming up soon where me and Sophie came up to visit me a week ago, and we were watching the awful what's it called, conspiracy YouTube video Zeitgeist, and we were thinking about watching not only Zeitgeist but Zeitgeist Addendum, where they correct all the lies that they say in Zeitgeist.
Do they make it any better though, or?
I don't know. I've not seen Zeitgeist Addendum, but I do know that they literally go through like each bit and be like, yes, we actually referenced a Nazi here, which is not good, and stuff like that. Yes.
Because it's like, I remember when it came out, it was huge. It was like one of those things that you'd download, a bunch of friends, you'd be like, I got this documentary off the internet, and we're gonna like, learn the real truth with it. Yeah, anyway.
Like I said,
that sounds like a good one.
I did mention, I'll give you a little sneak peek of the next limited hangout, but I did mention that at the point in my life when I watched Zeitgeist, it was also the point in my life where I smoked weed through a light bulb. So yeah. If you want to know about my material conditions, that's what they were.
Also, speaking of limited hangouts, if you subscribe to any of our tiers, you get access to this super fun, awesome podcast that we're making, which is basically about tons of conspiracy shit. It's really fun. Yeah. I was part of an episode about the Democrats. I think Mule was part of an episode about 9/11.
And well, you were also technically part of that episode, but you'll have to tune in and listen to find out why.
We got some more coming up.
It's super fun.
The format is basically one of us that knows about a conspiracy theory explaining it to the others, or well, that's like the idea or whatever. So I think the context and everything around it that kind of led to the emergence of like these theories. I can't remember what it was. Soph has one for me coming up soon. 15-minute cities, actually. That's what we're gonna do. And I've got some ideas for these guys too. So we'll see. But yeah, anyway, the next tier in the Patreon, Beast Mode. $34.50 New Zealand a month. What's that? That's like $20 American, probably.
Yeah,
20 American. Probably about that in pounds, right? Or is it like 18.50?
17.
Around there, roughly. Per month. And holy shit, are you actually going to go beast mode? Well, if you do, we can offer you all of that stuff from the lower tiers, but also like pin badges. And little pin badges. You can wear your excellent new Red Planet pin badge literally everywhere. It's completely cool and good to do. Obviously access to all the hangouts, the podcasts, stickers, all of that stuff from the lower tiers. And then one more tier on top of that. And so we were saying before, it would take like 75 people doing sprite mode to get us to our goal. Yeah. But if we have one person from the next tier, or is it
1.5? Yeah.
Okay, so 1.5. So round it up. If two of you, two people go to the next tier, which is Kira.
Sicko mode. Oh, Kira. Okay, yeah.
Sicko mode.
Yeah.
If you support us this much. Yeah. Oh, are we doing this? Are we doing the whole thing?
Yeah. Sure.
If you support us this much, we can only really reasonably offer you all of the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream.
Show.
So thank you, JBP, Nerylon Starfire, Queen Pib, and Cassie Tastrophe.
Hell yeah.
Thanks, Cassie. Thank you, Cassie.
We got a new sicko. I can't believe it.
New sicko.
Incredible. Sick. Absolutely fucked in the head, the lot of you. But we love you.
Messed up.
The sickest.
So fucked. We also have merch. Don't forget, you can go over to mercenarycreative.com and you can get hold of the Red Planet Queer Existence is Resistance shirt. If you're watching us right now live or on YouTube, you'll be able to see how beautiful you could maybe almost get to looking like, because no one will be quite as beautiful as Sophie from Mars. But you could get there almost close if you get our Queer Existence is Resistance shirt. You can also get the tote bag, which is phenomenal and very affordable, plus it helps the show. Get over there, get it done, get it all done. That's it. But what if I was watching Red Planet and I thought, that Tim fella, he brought up some amazing points. I'd like to hear some more stuff from him. What has he got to offer? Where can I do that, Tim?
Well, you can find me here on Twitch as Dread Conquest. Wait, where am I? No, Conquest of Dread on Twitch.
Your Conquest of Dread on Twitch.
Yeah, Conquest of Dread on Twitch and YouTube. Dread Conquest on Twitter. And Blue Sky, the other one. So yeah, you can find me there. I haven't really had much time to stream or anything lately because the last month has been a blur for me. But I do want to get back into it sometime soon. Maybe streaming some Baldur's Gate. I definitely want to stream coming up to Halloween. I want to stream some Puppet Combo games. If anyone is familiar with Puppet Combo,
yes,
they do like lo-fi PS1 era looking horror games inspired by like VHS kind of slasher era stuff. They're really, really good. I've done a bunch on stream before, and they're yeah, they're great. They're such a cool vibe, but very like Halloween-y. So that's roughly on the agenda. But what is on the agenda for young Kira? Where can we find more about her?
Well, I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 on my channel. We've been covering some news. I'm getting a little bit back into that because of everything happening. It's just a lot. So, but for most of the streams, we've been also trying to I've been trying to create a place where people can kind of like check out of that for a little bit with like-minded people. So you don't have to be like on edge or anything. So we've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 and, yeah, I've been really having a good time. Been having my elf ears, wear my elf ears every day too, because that feels more me. When I can't wear them to Red Planet. I don't know if Red Planet's ready for elf ears, but I'm definitely wearing them.
What kind of show would we be if we didn't allow elf ears? You can wear elf ears. What the hell?
Really? Maybe I'll wear elf ears.
Extremely ready for that.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, you can also check out my socials, Winky Face. I am a sex worker and I have socials. So you can find all my links in my link tree. It's linktra.ee/Kira Chats. Basically, all the websites I'm on are under Kira Chat, so just check me out there. But yeah, I'll be streaming tomorrow. And also, I just wanted to say that if you subscribe, become a member on our Patreon, if you do it during my stream on twitch.tv/Kira Chats, you will get an on-screen alert. And one of 8 DJ Mule, very Britophobic little statements will pop up. Little audio clips.
All 8? Is that
yeah, no, I use every single one. I know one of them you're like, don't use this one, but I use that one anyways. So yeah, make sure if you want that energy in your life, you want the on-screen Britophobic DJ Mule and recognition, check me out at any day that I'm streaming. I stream every single day except for Tuesdays and Wednesdays at twitch.tv/Kira Chat. So then you can have that in your life. But speaking of my good friend Mule, where can I find you?
I did those as a joke. I did them all as a joke.
Yeah, no, they're real.
I didn't think she'd use any.
It got us a sickle.
That's incredible. Okay. All right. Sorry, that's just really fucked me up. Okay, yeah, me. Oh, where can you find more of me? Well, I just released a new YouTube video, which is probably getting buried by the algorithm because it contains footage of the incredibly based Kurdish women's protection units who defeated ISIS. Because I use that as a kind of gotcha when I'm talking about a transphobe who basically says women in the military would never be an all-male military, but obviously there's many examples of that not being the case. So unfortunately, that's getting buried in the algorithm. But if you search it, if you go to my channel, youtube.com/c/DJMUEL, you will find it there. It's called TikTok Live is the Worst. And it really is the worst. If you've ever been on TikTok, if you've seen any of the lives that come up, they just display some of the worst bigoted piece of shits I've ever seen in my life. So I do a bit of a video talking about that. Lots of people who've watched it say it's very good. So go ahead and see for yourself if it's very good. YouTube.com/C/DJ MUEL. You could also find me with that username on various different platforms like Patreon. All of my YouTube videos, all of my content is made possible by my Patreon supporters and by my Twitch community as well. And you can also find me on twitch.tv/DJ Mule. And I'm also on Blue Sky. It's bsky.social.app at DJ MUEL. I don't even know what it is, what the weird app.
Your DJMule.bsky.social.
Yes.
Right?
Probably. I guess so. I don't know. I'm pretty sure if you just Google DJ Mule, I'll show up. Yeah, not Google, search for it on Blue Sky. But if there's anything that I've forgotten to tell you about, go to linktree.ee/DJ MUEL. You'll find all my stuff there. Speaking of which, you can also find our absent co-host, Sophie from Mars's stuff on her Linktree, which is linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars. She's on YouTube. She's on Patreon. She's on Instagram. She's on fucking everything. So you should go and follow her all over there as well. But yeah, amazing. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting us, and especially
free Palestine.
Don't forget to free Palestine.
Do that on your way out.
Do it on your way out. We're gonna go raid Queen Pip. See you later. It's fingers. Oh, it's fingers.